Hi everyone, welcome back to Mr. Sleepy Crime. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's stories. Story 1. On March 22, 2024, the morning jogger's scream pierced the pre-dawn silence of Virginia Beach. There, half buried in the sand beneath the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, lay a single white sneaker, size 7, barely worn, with the distinctive teal laces that 26-year-old Madison Walsh had posted about on Instagram just 3 days earlier. But Madison was nowhere to be found. What began as a routine missing person case would evolve into something far more disturbing, a web of secrets, lies, and betrayal that stretched from the tourist-filled boardwalks of Virginia Beach to the shadowy corners of the dark web. It would take investigators down a path they never expected, revealing how someone you trust the most can become your greatest threat. This is the story of Madison Walsh, a woman whose picture-perfect life masked a dangerous reality she never saw coming. It's a story about how modern technology can be both a lifeline and a trap, how social media creates the illusion of safety while exposing us to unprecedented danger. And it begins with a morning run that never ended. Madison Walsh was the kind of person who made everyone around her believe in second chances. At 26, she had already rebuilt her life once, transforming herself from a struggling college dropout into one of Virginia Beach's most promising young entrepreneurs. Her boutique fitness studio, titled Strength, had become the place where local professionals and military families came not just to work out, but to find community. The studio occupied a prime spot just 6 blocks from the oceanfront, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering glimpses of the Atlantic beyond the tourist shops and seafood restaurants. Madison had designed every detail herself, from the reclaimed driftwood accent wall to the motivational quotes painted in flowing script across the mirrors. "Strength isn't given, it's built," read her favorite, positioned right where clients would see it during their hardest moments. But it was Madison herself who drew people in. Standing 5'4" with shoulder-length auburn hair that caught the light just right, she had the kind of infectious energy that made even the most reluctant exerciser want to try just one more rep. Her laugh, genuine and unguarded, could be heard throughout the studio, usually accompanied by words of encouragement that felt personal rather than generic. "You've got this, Mrs. Henderson. Remember, we're not competing with anyone but ourselves." What most of her clients didn't know was how hard-won Madison's optimism really was. 5 years earlier, she had been a different person entirely, partying too much, skipping classes at Old Dominion University, drifting through life without direction or purpose. The wake-up call came when her younger sister Emma, then just 17, was diagnosed with leukemia. Madison dropped out of college immediately to help care for Emma, working 2 jobs to support her family while her sister went through treatment. During those long nights at the hospital, Madison discovered fitness as a way to manage her stress and anxiety. What started as desperate midnight runs along the beach evolved into a passion that gave her life new meaning. When Emma went into remission 2 years later, Madison knew exactly what she wanted to do. She enrolled in personal training certification programs, saved every penny she could, and slowly built her dream from the ground up. By 2023, Title Strength was thriving, and Madison had become something of a local celebrity, featured in Virginia Beach magazine's 30 Under 30, and regularly invited to speak at women's business conferences. Her social media presence reflected this success. Instagram posts showcased not just her perfectly curated fitness routines, but glimpses of her life that felt authentic and aspirational at the same time. Morning coffee on her apartment balcony with ocean views. Sunset runs along the Chesapeake Bay. Sunday brunches with her tight-knit group of friends. Date nights with her boyfriend of 8 months, Derek Thompson, a Navy pilot stationed at Naval Air Station Oceana. To her 12,000 followers, Madison Walsh appeared to have it all figured out. She was the girl who had overcome adversity, built something meaningful, and was living her best life by the sea. Her captions were always positive, her smile always bright, her future always promising. But social media, as investigators would later discover, tells only the story we want the world to see. Behind Madison's Instagram perfect life, something much darker was beginning to unfold. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks before her disappearance, though no one recognized it at the time. Madison had been closing up the studio late one evening when she noticed someone standing across the street, partially hidden by a parked van. She couldn't make out details in the dim streetlight, but something about the figure's stillness made her uncomfortable. She mentioned it to Derek that night, laughing it off even as she double-checked her apartment locks. "Probably just someone waiting for an Uber," she said. "But it was weird, you know? Like they were watching the studio." Derek, exhausted from a long training flight, mumbled something reassuring and fell asleep. It was the kind of small moment that seems insignificant until it becomes everything. The second incident happened a week later. Madison arrived at the studio to find that someone had been testing the door handles overnight. There were smudge marks on the glass where gloved hands had pressed and twisted, looking for weakness. The security system showed no signs of tampering, no actual break-in, but the message was clear: someone wanted inside. This time, Madison called the police. Officer Jennifer Martinez responded, taking notes and promising to increase patrols in the area. She suggested Madison upgrade her security system and maybe consider changing her routine slightly, arriving and leaving at different times, parking in different spots. "Probably just a would-be thief checking out businesses," Officer Martinez explained. "But it's good that you're being cautious." Madison followed the advice, installing new cameras and motion sensors that connected to her phone. For a few days, she felt better. The technology made her feel protected, in control. But what she didn't realize was that someone else was watching those same cameras, tracking her movements through the very systems designed to keep her safe. The third incident was the most unsettling of all, though Madison would only recognize its true significance in hindsight. She was teaching an evening yoga class when her phone buzzed with a notification from her home security system. The camera in her apartment hallway had detected motion. Madison glanced at the app, expecting to see a neighbor or maybe a package delivery. Instead, she saw a figure in dark clothing standing just outside her apartment door, not moving, not knocking, just standing there. The timestamp showed the person had been there for over 3 minutes. Heart racing, Madison excused herself from class and called building security. By the time they checked the hallway, the person was gone. The elevator security camera showed only a hooded figure whose face was never visible. Could have been someone who got off on the wrong floor, the security guard suggested. Or maybe a delivery person checking apartment numbers. But Madison knew better. Someone was watching her, learning her patterns, testing her defenses. She just didn't know who, or how far they were willing to go. That night, she called Derek from her apartment, pacing from window to window as she spoke. "I think I need to stay with you for a few days," she said, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. "Just until this weird stuff stops happening." Derek's response would later become one of the details that haunted investigators the most. Instead of immediately agreeing, instead of insisting she come over right away, he hesitated. "This week is really crazy with training exercises," he said. "Maybe by the weekend?" Madison felt something cold settle in her stomach, though she couldn't quite name what it was. Derek had never been unavailable when she needed him before. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll figure something out." She spent that night on her friend Carla's couch, sleeping fitfully while Carla's German Shepherd, Max, kept watch by the door. It was the first of several nights Madison would spend away from her apartment, bouncing between friends' places and hotels, trying to shake the feeling that someone was always one step behind her. What Madison didn't know was that her phone had been compromised weeks earlier. Every text, every call, every location check-in was being monitored by someone who had become obsessed with every detail of her life. Her social media posts weren't just entertainment for this person, they were intelligence, carefully analyzed for patterns and opportunities. And the person watching her knew exactly when she would be alone, exactly when she would be vulnerable, exactly when she would be running along the deserted stretch of beach where the Chesapeake Bay meets the Atlantic Ocean. The person watching her was someone she trusted completely. March 21, 2024, dawned crisp and clear in Virginia Beach, with the kind of brilliant blue sky that made locals forget about the long winter they'd endured. Madison woke up in her own apartment for the first time in a week, having convinced herself that the strange incidents were over. The new security system had been quiet, her classes at the studio had gone smoothly, and Derek had finally made time for a proper date night. They'd had dinner at Catch 31, her favorite seafood restaurant overlooking the Chesapeake Bay, and for the first time in weeks, Madison felt like herself again. Derek had been attentive and apologetic about his recent distance, explaining the pressure he was under with upcoming deployment preparations. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I know you were scared." Madison squeezed his fingers, feeling some of the tension she'd carried finally begin to ease. "It's okay. I think I was probably overreacting anyway. Maybe it was just coincidences." But even as she said it, some instinct deep in her gut whispered that it wasn't coincidences at all. They'd gone back to Derek's apartment that night, and Madison had slept better than she had in weeks, wrapped in the familiar comfort of his arms and the sound of his steady breathing. When she woke at 5:30 a.m., she felt refreshed and optimistic, ready to get back to her normal routine. "Going for a run?" Derek asked sleepily as Madison quietly gathered her workout clothes. "Just a quick one before I open the studio," she whispered back. "The sunrise is supposed to be beautiful this morning." Derek mumbled something that might have been, "Be careful," and rolled over, already falling back asleep. Madison kissed his temples softly and let herself out, pulling on her running gear in the hallway so she wouldn't wake him. Her plan was simple, a 4-mile loop that would take her from Derek's apartment complex in the Sheik's Beach area, along the bay front, and back. It was a route she'd run dozens of times, popular with other early morning runners and generally considered very safe. The path was well lit, regularly patrolled, and busy enough that she was never truly alone. Madison stretched against the hood of her Honda Civic, checking her phone one more time before starting her run. She'd gotten into the habit of posting her running routes on her Instagram stories, partly for safety, partly because her followers enjoyed seeing the beautiful Virginia Beach scenery through her morning runs. "Good morning, beautiful humans," she said to her phone's front-facing camera, the bay sparkling behind her in the early morning light. "The weather app says 42 degrees, but it feels perfect out here. About to tackle my favorite sunrise route. Hope you're all having an amazing Thursday." She posted the story, added her location tag, and tucked her phone into the secure pocket of her running jacket. Her Apple Watch would track her route and send updates to Derek and her sister Emma, another safety precaution she'd adopted after the weird incidents at her apartment. Madison set off at an easy pace, her breath creating small puffs of vapor in the cool air. The first mile took her along a residential street lined with modest beach houses and condos, their windows still dark at this early hour. A few other runners passed her going the opposite direction, exchanging the small nods and waves that marked them as members of the early morning club. As she reached the waterfront path, the bay opened up beside her in all its morning glory. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the water in shades of gold and pink that made her phone's camera seem inadequate. Madison felt her spirits lift with each step, remembering why she'd fallen in love with running in the first place. This was her time, her space, her peace. At the 2-mile mark, her watch buzzed with a text message. She glanced down, expecting to see something from Derek or maybe an early rising client canceling their session. Instead, she saw a number she didn't recognize. "Beautiful morning for a run. You look peaceful." Madison's steps faltered slightly, but she didn't stop moving. It was probably just someone who followed her on social media, maybe trying to be friendly. She'd gotten similar messages before from followers who felt like they knew her personally. But something about the timing made her uneasy. She was currently on a stretch of path where she couldn't see any other runners, and the message had arrived just as she'd reached the most isolated part of her route. She turned around, scanning the path behind her, but saw only empty sidewalk stretching back toward the residential area. A few seagulls picked at something near the water's edge. A park maintenance truck was parked near the public restrooms about a quarter-mile back, but she couldn't see any workers. Madison picked up her pace slightly, deciding to cut her run short and head back toward Derek's apartment. She'd covered about 3 miles total, close enough to her goal that she wouldn't feel like she'd wasted the morning. Her phone buzzed again. "Don't turn around so much. It makes you look paranoid." This time, Madison stopped completely. Someone was watching her right now, close enough to see her movements in real time. She pulled out her phone and called Derek immediately. "Hey," his sleepy voice answered after several rings. "Everything okay?" "Someone's watching me," Madison said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm getting texts from someone who can see what I'm doing right now." She heard Derek sitting up in bed, suddenly fully awake. "Where are you exactly?" "On the Bay Path, about half a mile from Pleasure House Point." "I'm heading back to your place now. I'm getting dressed right now. Keep me on the phone, okay? Just keep talking to me." Madison started jogging again, phone pressed to her ear, feeling slightly better with Derek's voice as company. She described what she could see around her, the few other early morning walkers now visible in the distance, the maintenance truck she was approaching, the familiar landmarks that meant she was getting closer to safety. "I can see your building now," she told Derek, spotting his apartment complex across the small inlet. "I'll be there in like 10 minutes. "Good. I'm heading down to meet you in the parking lot." But Madison never made it to the parking lot. Her phone went dead at exactly 6:47 a.m., right as she was passing the maintenance truck parked near the public restrooms. Derek tried calling back immediately, but the calls went straight to voicemail. He threw on clothes and ran outside, jogging toward the path where Madison should have emerged. What he found instead was her phone, lying in the grass about 20 yards from the maintenance truck, its screen cracked as if it had been thrown down hard. Her earbuds were scattered nearby, and there were signs of a struggle in the soft earth, heel marks where someone had been dragged backward, away from the path. The maintenance truck was gone. Derek called 911 with shaking hands, trying to describe what he'd found while scanning the area desperately for any sign of Madison. By the time police arrived, other morning runners had gathered, their faces pale with the recognition that something terrible had happened to someone just like them. Detective Ray Castellanos was the first investigator on scene, a 20-year veteran who had seen enough missing person cases to know that the first few hours were critical. He took one look at the evidence, the phone, the signs of struggle, the witness account of someone watching Madison in real time, and knew this wasn't a random crime of opportunity. Someone had planned this. Someone had been watching Madison, learning her routines, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And they had succeeded with military precision, snatching her from a public path in broad daylight without a single witness. The hunt for Madison Walsh was about to begin, but her captor already had a significant head start. And as investigators would soon discover, he had been planning this for much longer than anyone could have imagined. Detective Ray Castellanos had worked hundreds of missing person cases in his 20 years with the Virginia Beach Police Department, but something about the Madison Walsh disappearance immediately set off alarm bells in his mind. The precision of it, the planning involved, the way her phone had been discarded like bait, this wasn't the work of an opportunistic predator. This was someone who knew Madison's habits intimately. Within 6 hours of Derek's 911 call, Castellanos had assembled what he privately called his A-team, Detective Sarah Kim, a digital forensics specialist who could extract information from a grain of sand, and Detective Marcus Webb, whose background in military intelligence made him invaluable for cases involving surveillance and planning. Their first stop was Madison's apartment, where they conducted a thorough search with Derek's permission and the building manager's cooperation. What they found painted a picture of a woman who had been increasingly on edge in the weeks before her disappearance. "Look at this," Detective Kim said, examining Madison's laptop. The browser history showed searches for how to tell if your phone is being monitored, signs of digital stalking, and hidden camera detection apps. Most of the searches had been conducted in the 3 weeks leading up to her disappearance. Her bedroom revealed additional evidence of growing paranoia, or awareness. Madison had purchased several small mirrors that she'd positioned strategically around her apartment to check for anyone following her. A portable door alarm sat on her nightstand, and her curtains had been reinforced with blackout material to prevent anyone from seeing inside. She knew someone was watching her, Detective Webb observed, photographing the security modifications. Question is, did she know who? The answer began to emerge when Detective Kim analyzed Madison's phone, recovered from the crime scene. Despite the cracked screen, she was able to extract its contents and immediately discovered something disturbing. "She's got spyware on here," Kim announced, her voice tight with anger. "Sophisticated stuff. Someone's been monitoring her texts, calls, location, even her camera and microphone." The spyware was military-grade, the kind of surveillance software that required physical access to install and significant technical knowledge to deploy properly. Whoever had done this had been inside Madison's apartment, holding her phone, installing tools that would let them track her every movement. "When was it installed?" Castellanos asked. Kim traced through the phone's logs, her face growing more grim with each screen. "About 6 weeks ago. And get this, it's been sending data to an encrypted server. Whoever's been watching her has recordings of her conversations, copies of all her texts, even photos taken remotely using her camera." The violation was comprehensive and chilling. Someone had been living in Madison's digital life for weeks, watching through her own devices as she tried to figure out why she felt unsafe. Detective Webb was examining Madison's social media accounts when he made the next crucial discovery. Her Instagram posts from the last month, someone's been screenshotting all of them within minutes of posting. "Look at these analytics." The pattern was clear and obsessive. Every photo Madison posted, every story she shared, every location she tagged was being immediately captured and stored by someone who had set up alerts to notify them the moment she posted anything new. "He's building a profile," Webb continued. "Learning her routines, her favorite places, who she spends time with. This is textbook stalking behavior, but elevated to a level I've rarely seen." They requested Madison's full social media data from Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, a process that would take days but would eventually reveal the full scope of the digital surveillance she'd been under. In the meantime, they focused on the physical evidence from the abduction site. The maintenance truck that Derek had seen was their best lead. A canvass of the area revealed that Virginia Beach Parks and Recreation had no scheduled maintenance work in that area for the entire week. Someone had used a fake city truck to blend in while watching for Madison's arrival. Security cameras from nearby businesses provided additional pieces of the puzzle. The truck appeared on 3 different cameras between 5:30 and 6:50 a.m., always positioned where it would have a clear view of the running path. The license plate was either obscured or fake, the numbers didn't match any vehicle registered in Virginia. But the cameras also captured something else: Madison wasn't the only woman who had been watched. Over the previous month, the same truck had been spotted at locations connected to at least 3 other young women who had posted running routes on social media. "He's been hunting," Detective Kim realized as they reviewed the footage. Madison wasn't his first target. She was just the first one whose routine he could fully predict. This revelation transformed the case from a single abduction to a potential serial predator investigation. The FBI was notified, and Agent Lisa Chen was assigned to coordinate with the local team. Agent Chen brought a wealth of experience in digital stalking cases and immediately recognized patterns that elevated the threat level significantly. The level of surveillance, the technical sophistication, the long-term planning. "This isn't someone acting on impulse," she explained to the team. "We're looking for someone with significant technical skills, probably military or law enforcement background, and likely someone who has legitimate access to surveillance equipment." The profile was becoming clearer. but it was also becoming more frightening. They were hunting someone who knew how to avoid detection, who had the tools and knowledge to stay ahead of a police investigation. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Emma Walsh, Madison's younger sister, had driven up from North Carolina the moment she heard about the disappearance. She was sitting in the police station, looking through photos on her phone to provide investigators with recent pictures of Madison, when she noticed something odd. "This is weird," Emma said, showing Detective Castellanos a selfie Madison had sent her 2 weeks earlier. "Maddie never takes pictures in her car. She always said it was dangerous and set a bad example for clients." But in the photo, Madison was clearly sitting in a vehicle, wearing her seatbelt, with what appeared to be a parking garage visible through the window behind her. She sent this with a message saying she was having car trouble and Derek was giving her a ride, Emma continued. "But that's Derek's car behind her, not hers. Why would she be sitting in someone else's car if Derek was giving her a ride?" Detective Kim examined the photo more closely, using enhancement software to analyze the reflection in Madison's sunglasses. What she found made everyone in the room go silent. In the reflection, clearly visible, was the person taking the photo. And it wasn't Madison using her front-facing camera as everyone had assumed. Someone else had been in that car with her, someone who had taken her photo and then used her phone to send it to her sister, maintaining the illusion that everything was normal. "We need to talk to Derek again," Castellanos said quietly. "And this time, we need to ask him some very different questions." But when they called Derek's apartment, no one answered. When they drove to his address, they found his car gone and his apartment standing empty. According to his neighbors, Derek Thompson had loaded his truck early that morning and driven away without explanation. Naval Air Station Oceana confirmed what the investigators had begun to suspect: Derek Thompson hadn't been scheduled for training exercises in weeks. In fact, he'd been placed on administrative leave pending a psychological evaluation after concerns were raised about his behavior toward female personnel. The man Madison trusted most, the person she'd run to when she felt unsafe, was the same person who had been watching her every move, infiltrating her digital life, and planning her abduction for weeks. And now both Derek and Madison had vanished completely. Derek Thompson's personnel file at Naval Air Station Oceana painted a troubling picture that investigators wished they'd seen weeks earlier. What began as an exemplary military record had slowly deteriorated over the past year, marked by increasingly problematic interactions with female colleagues and a pattern of behavior that his superior officers had begun to document with growing concern. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes, Derek's commanding officer, met with the investigative team in a secure conference room on base, her expression grim as she spread Derek's file across the table. "We should have acted sooner," she admitted without preamble. The signs were all there, but he was careful never to cross any lines that would have triggered immediate action. The file revealed a methodical pattern of escalation. It started with complaints from female personnel about Derek lingering too long in conversations, asking personal questions about their relationships and living situations. When confronted, he would apologize profusely and claim he was just being friendly. Then came reports of him appearing in places where he shouldn't have been, walking past female colleagues' apartments during off-duty hours, showing up at the same restaurants and gyms they frequented, always with plausible explanations that made formal complaints difficult to pursue. The breakthrough came 3 months ago, Lieutenant Commander Hayes continued, when Petty Officer Rodriguez reported that her personal information, address, phone number, vehicle registration, had somehow been accessed through base computers. When we investigated, we found Derek's digital fingerprints all over the inquiry. Derek had been using his security clearance and base computer access to research female personnel, building detailed profiles of their personal lives. The investigation revealed searches into at least 12 different women, including deep dives into their social media accounts, financial records, and family information. "We were building a case for court-martial when he started taking leave time," Hayes explained. "He said he needed to deal with family issues. We thought maybe some time away would help him get his head straight. Instead, Derek had used that time to focus entirely on Madison. Detective Kim had been working around the clock to trace Derek's digital activities, and what she discovered revealed the full scope of his obsession. Using equipment that his military position had given him access to, Derek had been conducting surveillance that went far beyond simple stalking. "He's been using military-grade surveillance equipment," Kim reported to the team. "Parabolic microphones, long-range cameras, signal interceptors, stuff that's not available to civilians. He's been watching Madison for months, recording her conversations, tracking her movements with precision that would impress intelligence agencies." The evidence showed that Derek had been building what intelligence analysts call a complete life profile of Madison. He knew her work schedule down to the minute, had recordings of her phone conversations with friends and family, and had even infiltrated her apartment building's security system to monitor her comings and goings. Most disturbingly, he had been using their relationship as cover for his surveillance activities. When Madison mentioned feeling watched or unsafe, Derek had positioned himself as her protector while simultaneously being the source of her fear. "It's psychological manipulation at a sophisticated level," Agent Chen explained. "He created the problem and then presented himself as the solution, making Madison dependent on him for safety while he was actually the threat." The team found evidence that Derek had been practicing this manipulation for weeks. He would stage incidents, like having someone test Madison's studio door handles, and then comfort her afterward, building trust while gathering information about her fears and responses. But the most chilling discovery came when Detective Webb analyzed Derek's internet search history from his personal devices. The searches revealed a man who had been planning an abduction for months, researching everything from tranquilizer drugs to remote locations where someone could be held without detection. "Look at this timeline," Webb said, projecting Derek's search history onto the conference room wall. 3 months ago, he starts researching sedatives and their effects. 2 months ago, he's looking at real estate listings for isolated properties within a 4-hour drive of Virginia Beach. 6 weeks ago, he starts researching soundproofing materials and security systems. The searches showed a methodical mind at work, someone who understood the importance of planning and preparation. Derek had researched police investigation procedures, studied how missing person cases were typically handled, and even looked into jurisdictional issues that might complicate a multi-state investigation. "He's been thinking like a hunter," Webb continued. "Patient, methodical, always thinking several steps ahead." The real estate searches provided their first solid lead on where Derek might have taken Madison. He had viewed listings for rental properties in rural areas of North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia, places isolated enough to avoid detection but close enough to his base that he could maintain some semblance of his normal routine. One property in particular stood out, a hunting cabin in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, advertised as completely private and perfect for someone seeking total isolation. The property had been rented 2 months earlier by someone using Derek's real name and military ID. "That's either incredibly sloppy or incredibly arrogant," Agent Chen observed. "Someone with his intelligence training would normally use false identification for something like this." Detective Castellanos had a different theory. "He wants to be found eventually. Not immediately, but eventually. This whole thing is about control and power, but it's also about recognition. He wants people to know how smart he is, how well he planned this." The psychological profile that was emerging painted Derek as a man who felt overlooked and underappreciated, someone whose military career had stalled and whose personal relationships had failed. Taking Madison wasn't just about possessing her, it was about proving his superiority, his ability to outsmart everyone around him. But Derek had made one crucial mistake in his planning. He had underestimated Madison. The team discovered this when they found Derek's practice notebook, left behind in his apartment like a taunt or a gift. The notebook contained detailed plans for the abduction, including contingencies for different scenarios and Madison's likely responses. But the plans all assumed Madison would be a passive victim, someone who would freeze or comply out of fear. Derek had spent months watching Madison through digital surveillance, but he had missed the core of who she was, someone who had survived her sister's illness, built a business from nothing, and faced every challenge in her life with determination and courage. He knows her schedule and her routines, Agent Chen said, reading through Derek's notes. But he doesn't know her character. That might be the advantage we need. The investigation team was now operating under the assumption that Madison was being held at the North Carolina cabin, but they also knew that a direct assault could be catastrophic. Derek had military training, access to weapons, and nothing left to lose. The plan they developed was complex and risky, involving multiple agencies and requiring precise timing. But first, they needed to confirm that Madison was still alive and locate her exact position. The answer came from an unexpected source, Madison herself, using skills she'd learned during the darkest period of her life to send a signal that only people who truly knew her would recognize. Madison Walsh regained consciousness slowly, awareness returning in fragments like pieces of a broken mirror. Cold concrete against her cheek. The smell of damp wood and something metallic. The sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness. Her head throbbed where Derek had struck her with something, she couldn't remember what, after pulling her into the fake maintenance truck. Her wrists were zip-tied behind her back, and her ankles were secured to what felt like a heavy chain. But she was alive. And she was thinking clearly. The room around her gradually came into focus as her eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through what appeared to be boarded-up windows. It was a basement or cellar, with cinderblock walls and a concrete floor that felt like it hadn't been heated in years. In one corner, she could see a camping chair and a small table with what looked like surveillance equipment, multiple phones, a laptop, and devices she didn't recognize. Derek was nowhere to be seen, but she could hear movement above her, footsteps pacing back and forth, the sound of a television or radio playing softly. He was here, somewhere in the building above, and he was awake. Madison forced herself to stay calm and think strategically. During Emma's cancer treatment, she'd spent countless hours in hospital waiting rooms reading everything she could get her hands on, including true crime books and survival guides. One book in particular, written by a former FBI agent, had emphasized that kidnapping victims who survived were usually those who never stopped looking for opportunities to escape or signal for help. The first step was understanding her environment. Madison tested her restraints carefully, trying not to make noise. The zip ties on her wrists were tight but not impossibly so. With enough time and the right technique, she might be able to work free. The chain on her ankles was heavier and more secure, but it gave her about 6 feet of movement. More importantly, she realized she wasn't in a soundproof room. She could hear Derek moving around upstairs, which meant sound could travel both ways. If she could make noise at the right time, when someone might be nearby to hear it, she might be able to alert potential rescuers. But first, she needed to figure out where she was. The basement had a distinctive smell that reminded her of something familiar. Salt air mixed with wood preservative and something else, fish. They were near water, probably near the ocean, and in a building that had been used for storing fishing equipment or boat supplies. When Derek finally came downstairs, Madison was ready for him. She'd positioned herself to appear more helpless than she actually was, slumping against the wall with her eyes half closed, playing up the effects of whatever he'd used to sedate her. "You're awake," Derek said, his voice carrying a strange mixture of concern and satisfaction. "I was worried I'd used too much of the sedative. How are you feeling?" Madison looked at him with what she hoped appeared to be confusion and fear. The Derek standing in front of her bore little resemblance to the caring boyfriend she'd known. His clothes were disheveled, his hair uncombed, and his eyes had a manic quality that made her skin crawl. "Derek," she whispered, letting her voice shake. "What's happening? Where are we?" "We're somewhere safe," he said, kneeling down beside her with what he probably thought was a reassuring smile. "Somewhere we can be together without all the distractions and interruptions. I've been planning this for so long, Madison. You have no idea how much work went into making this perfect." As Derek talked, Madison listened for clues about their location and his plans. He mentioned driving through the night, crossing state lines, and needing to avoid the usual roads. He talked about having supplies for as long as we need, and having planned for every contingency. But he also revealed something that gave Madison hope. He was planning to contact someone soon to let them know you're safe. Derek's need for recognition, his desire to be seen as clever and in control, meant he couldn't simply disappear with her. He needed an audience for his performance. I know everyone's probably worried about you, Derek continued, settling into the camping chair and watching her with uncomfortable intensity. Your sister, your friends, even the police by now. But I'm going to send them a message soon, let them know you're okay and that you chose to come with me. Madison's mind raced. If Derek was planning to make contact, that would give investigators a chance to trace the communication. But she also realized something else. Derek genuinely believed, or was trying to convince himself, that she had come willingly. I don't understand, she said, maintaining the confused victim persona while gathering information. I was running, and then. I can't remember what happened. Derek's expression shifted slightly, becoming almost paternal. You were upset, remember? All those strange things happening around your apartment, feeling like someone was watching you. You called me that morning, said you needed help, that you wanted to get away from everything. Madison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold basement. Derek wasn't just trying to convince her, he was rewriting history in his own mind, creating a narrative where she was a willing participant in her own kidnapping. I did that, she whispered. Of course you did. You trust me, Madison. You love me. That's why when I suggested we go somewhere safe, somewhere we could figure things out together, you agreed. This delusion was both terrifying and potentially useful. If Derek believed she had come willingly, he might be less cautious about security, might give her opportunities to escape or signal for help. Over the next several hours, as Derek moved between the basement and upstairs areas, Madison began to piece together more details about their location and situation. From conversations Derek had with someone on the phone, always stepping out of earshot for the actual calls, she gathered that they were in a remote area where cell service was spotty. But Derek had also made a crucial mistake. In his obsession with controlling every aspect of her life, he had brought several of her personal items from her apartment, including her fitness tracker. The device was still on her wrist, apparently overlooked in Derek's focus on her phone and other obvious communication devices. Madison knew that her fitness tracker had emergency features she'd never used, including the ability to send distress signals and location data if activated correctly. The challenge was figuring out how to activate these features without Derek noticing, and whether the device could get a signal from wherever they were being held. Her opportunity came on the second day, when Derek decided to let her clean up as a reward for being cooperative. He escorted her to a small bathroom upstairs, removing the ankle restraints but keeping her hands zip-tied. The bathroom had a small window, and through it Madison could see something that made her heart leap. They were near water, but not just any water. She could see the distinctive lighthouse of Cape Hatteras in the distance, which meant they were somewhere in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. More importantly, she could see fishing boats moving in the distance, which meant there were people nearby, even if the immediate area was isolated. While Derek waited outside the bathroom door, Madison worked frantically with her fitness tracker. She knew from the manual that there was a specific sequence of button presses that would activate emergency mode and begin broadcasting her location to emergency services. The trick was doing it without making the beeping sounds that would alert Derek. She managed to activate the emergency beacon just as Derek knocked on the door, telling her to hurry up. As she rejoined him in the main room of what she now realized was a small fishing cabin, Madison felt a mixture of hope and terror. Help might be coming, but Derek was becoming increasingly agitated and unpredictable. That evening, Derek made his first contact with the outside world since the abduction. He used Madison's phone to send a video message to her sister Emma, with Madison positioned carefully to appear as though she was speaking voluntarily. "Hi Em," Madison said, following Derek's whispered instructions while trying to embed hidden messages that her sister might recognize. "I'm okay. I needed to get away for a while, to think about things. Derek's been helping me, taking care of me. We're somewhere safe, somewhere peaceful. But Madison also included subtle signals that she hoped Emma would catch. She mentioned being tired from all the running, which Emma would know was strange since Madison never described her workouts as tiresome. She touched her collarbone 3 times while speaking, a nervous habit Emma had pointed out to her years earlier. And she mentioned that she was learning to be patient, using the exact phrase Emma had said to her during her cancer treatment when Madison was struggling with feeling helpless. Derek seemed satisfied with the video and sent it immediately. What he didn't realize was that Madison's fitness tracker had been steadily broadcasting her location data for over 12 hours, and that the emergency signal had been received by multiple agencies. The net was beginning to close around their location, but Madison knew that rescue attempts could go catastrophically wrong if Derek felt cornered. She needed to continue playing the willing victim while looking for opportunities to either escape or neutralize Derek herself. The opportunity came sooner than she expected, in a way that demonstrated both Derek's deteriorating mental state and his fundamental misunderstanding of who Madison really was. Detective Castellanos was reviewing Madison's emergency beacon data when his phone rang with a call that changed everything. Emma Walsh was on the line, her voice tight with controlled panic. "That video Derek sent, Madison's trying to tell me something," Emma said without preamble. "She's giving me signals, things only I would understand." "What kind of signals?" Castellanos asked, immediately putting the call on speaker so the rest of the team could hear. "She's touching her collarbone, it's something she does when she's scared but trying not to show it. And she said she's learning to be patient. That's what I told her when I was in chemo, when she was frustrated about not being able to fix everything. She's telling me she's in danger but she's waiting for the right moment." Agent Chen leaned forward, her interest piqued. "What else did you notice?" "She said she was tired from all the running. Madison never talks about running like that, it's her passion, her stress relief. If she's describing it as tiring, she's trying to tell me something's wrong." The video analysis confirmed Emma's instincts. When Detective Kim enhanced the audio, they could hear what sounded like water lapping against wood in the background, and the distant sound of boat engines. Combined with the location data from Madison's fitness tracker, they now had a precise target, a rental cabin on Hatteras Island that Derek had reserved 2 months earlier. But the situation was becoming increasingly volatile. Derek's phone records showed he'd been making erratic calls to his base commander, alternating between angry demands and confused rambling about proving his worth. His last call had been to a local news station, claiming he had an exclusive story about police incompetence and cover-ups. "He's decompensating," Agent Chen observed. "The fantasy he's constructed is breaking down, and that makes him extremely dangerous. If he feels cornered, he could hurt Madison or himself." The tactical team that was assembled for the rescue operation included specialists from multiple agencies, FBI hostage rescue, Navy SEALs familiar with Derek's training, and local SWAT teams who knew the terrain of the Outer Banks. But they all agreed on one crucial point: any direct assault carried enormous risks. Derek had military training, was likely armed, and was holding Madison in a confined space where collateral damage was almost inevitable. The psychological profile suggested he would rather kill Madison and himself than face capture and the destruction of his grandiose self-image. The solution came from an unexpected source: Madison herself. On the 3rd day of her captivity, Derek's paranoia reached a breaking point. He'd been monitoring police radio frequencies and news reports obsessively, becoming increasingly agitated as he realized the scope of the search for Madison. "They're making me look like a monster," he ranted, pacing the small cabin while Madison watched from her position on the floor. "Like I kidnapped you, like I'm some kind of predator. They don't understand what we have, what I've done to protect you." Madison recognized that Derek was reaching a crisis point where his delusions could completely collapse, potentially triggering violence. She decided to take a calculated risk, using his need for validation against him. "You're right," she said quietly. "They don't understand. Maybe we should tell them ourselves. Derek stopped pacing, his attention focusing on her with laser intensity. What do you mean? You said you wanted to prove how smart you are, how well you planned this. What if we did an interview? Something that would show people the truth about us, about why I chose to come with you. The idea appealed to Derek's ego and his need for recognition. Over the next hour, Madison carefully manipulated him into agreeing to contact a news station and arrange for a live interview that would set the record straight. What Derek didn't realize was that Madison was setting a trap. She knew that any media contact would give law enforcement the opportunity to establish communication and potentially negotiate. More importantly, she was betting that Derek's need to appear in control during a live broadcast would require him to remove her restraints and position them in a way that might give her opportunities to act. Derek spent hours preparing for what he envisioned as his moment of vindication. He set up lights and camera equipment, choosing a location in the cabin that would show both him and Madison clearly. He practiced his talking points, all of which focused on his intelligence, his careful planning, and Madison's supposed willing participation. Meanwhile, law enforcement was using Derek's preparation time to position assets around the cabin. Thermal imaging confirmed 2 people inside, with Madison apparently restrained in the basement area and Derek moving between floors. Parabolic microphones picked up fragments of conversation, enough to confirm that Madison was alive and coherent. The breakthrough came when Derek finally made contact with Channel 7 News in Norfolk, demanding to speak with their lead anchor about an exclusive story. The news director, working closely with FBI negotiators, agreed to a live remote interview scheduled for 6 p.m. What Derek didn't know was that the interview would give law enforcement multiple advantages: a fixed time and location where Derek would be distracted, an opportunity to assess the interior layout of the cabin through the video feed, and a chance for Madison to communicate directly with negotiators if the opportunity arose. As 6 p.m. approached, Derek became increasingly nervous and excited. He untied Madison's hands for the first time in 3 days, positioning her beside him on the cabin's small couch where they would both be visible to the camera. "Remember," he whispered to her as they waited for the interview to begin, "tell them how I saved you, how we chose to be together. Make them understand." Madison nodded, her mind racing through the plan she'd been developing. She had one chance to end this, and it would require perfect timing and a level of physical courage she'd never had to summon before. The interview began with Derek appearing calm and confident, explaining his version of events to the anchor. But as the questions became more challenging, his composure began to crack. "Mr. Thompson, police described this as a kidnapping. How do you respond to that charge?" "It's not kidnapping when someone comes willingly," Derek snapped. Madison wanted to get away from all the pressure, all the people watching her. "I provided a solution." "Madison, can you tell us in your own words what happened?" This was the moment Madison had been waiting for. She looked directly into the camera, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Madison Walsh. I was abducted 3 days ago while running near Virginia Beach. I am being held against my will by Derek Thompson at a location in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Derek has military training and access to weapons. I need help." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Derek's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, betrayal, and finally, rage. "You're lying," he said, his voice rising to a shout. "Tell them the truth. Tell them you chose this." But Madison was already moving. The hours she'd spent in the basement had given her time to work on her restraints and plan her approach. As Derek lunged toward her, she was ready. The self-defense training she'd taken after Emma's illness, the core strength developed through years of fitness instruction, and the desperation of someone fighting for her life combined in a burst of coordinated action. Madison drove her elbow into Derek's solar plexus, doubling him over, then used his momentum to throw him off balance. As he stumbled, she grabbed the heavy camera tripod and swung it with all her strength. The sound of the impact was audible through the live broadcast, followed by Derek's body hitting the floor. Madison didn't wait to see if he was unconscious. She ran for the door, screaming for help as tactical teams that had been positioned around the cabin moved in. The rescue was over in minutes, but the aftermath would last much longer. Derek Thompson was unconscious when the tactical team breached the cabin, blood pooling beneath his head from the impact of Madison's desperate strike with the tripod. The paramedics who treated him at the scene said later that he was lucky to be alive, a few inches in either direction, and Madison's blow could have been fatal. Not that anyone felt particularly sorry for him. Madison was treated for dehydration, minor injuries from her restraints, and what EMTs described as remarkable composure under extreme circumstances. She refused to be transported to the hospital until she'd given a preliminary statement to investigators, insisting that she wanted Derek's full crimes documented while the details were fresh in her memory. "He's been watching me for months," she told Detective Castellanos as they sat in the back of an ambulance, her voice steady despite the ordeal she'd just survived. "Not just following me, living in my digital life, recording my conversations, tracking my every movement. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity. This was systematic predation." The evidence recovered from the cabin supported Madison's account in horrifying detail. Derek's equipment included professional-grade surveillance devices, recording equipment, and terabytes of data documenting Madison's daily life. He had photos of her taken with telephoto lenses from impossible distances, recordings of private conversations made with parabolic microphones, and detailed journals cataloging her routines down to minute-by-minute schedules. But perhaps most disturbing were the other files investigators found, evidence that Madison hadn't been Derek's only target. Detective Kim's analysis of Derek's computers revealed surveillance files on at least 8 other women, all young professionals in the Virginia Beach area who maintained active social media profiles. Some had been watched for weeks, others for just a few days, but all had been subjected to the same systematic invasion of privacy that Madison had experienced. "He was hunting," Agent Chen explained to the press conference held 2 days after the rescue. Madison Walsh was not a random victim. She was selected through a methodical process that involved digital stalking, physical surveillance, and psychological manipulation over an extended period. 3 of the other women Derek had been watching came forward after seeing news coverage of the case. Their stories revealed a pattern of escalating harassment that had gone largely unrecognized because Derek was skilled at staying just below the threshold that would trigger police action. Jennifer Martinez, a 24-year-old physical therapist, described feeling watched for weeks but never seeing anyone suspicious. Her apartment's security cameras had been hacked, her phone had exhibited strange behavior, and she'd received anonymous messages that seemed to know details about her private life. "I kept telling my friends something was wrong, but I couldn't prove it," Jennifer said. "When I saw the news about Madison, I realized I'd been experiencing the exact same things." Rebecca Santos, a 28-year-old teacher, had similar experiences but had attributed them to an overactive imagination. Strange phone calls that immediately hung up, social media friend requests from accounts that seemed fake, and the persistent feeling of being observed had made her increasingly paranoid. "I started changing my routines, avoiding places I used to go, basically living in fear without really understanding why," Rebecca explained. "Now I know my instincts were right." The investigation revealed that Derek had been using his military security clearance and technical training to conduct surveillance that would have been impressive even by professional standards. He had accessed databases he wasn't authorized to use, deployed equipment that was supposed to be restricted to official operations, and used government resources to support his criminal activities. The charges against Derek were extensive: kidnapping, stalking, computer fraud, abuse of his military position, and multiple violations of federal surveillance laws. The prosecution estimated he could face up to 40 years in federal prison if convicted on all counts. But Derek's defense team, appointed after he was declared indigent following his dismissal from the Navy, argued that their client was suffering from severe mental illness that had impaired his judgment and understanding of reality. Mr. Thompson genuinely believed that Ms. Walsh had consented to their relationship and to leaving with him, his attorney argued during pretrial hearings. His military service, combined with undiagnosed psychological conditions, created a delusional state where he was unable to distinguish between fantasy and reality. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court painted a complex picture of Derek's mental state. Dr. Patricia Williams, a forensic psychiatrist with extensive experience in military cases, testified that Derek showed signs of narcissistic personality disorder combined with obsessive-compulsive tendencies that had been exacerbated by his military training. His background in surveillance and intelligence gathering gave him tools that amplified his underlying psychological issues, Dr. Williams explained. He became convinced that his superior knowledge and planning abilities justified his actions, even when those actions were clearly criminal. But Dr. Williams also made clear that mental illness did not excuse Derek's behavior or diminish his responsibility for his crimes. Mr. Thompson knew his actions were wrong, she testified. The elaborate planning, the attempts to avoid detection, the manipulation of evidence, all of these demonstrate consciousness of guilt and awareness that he was committing crimes. Madison herself became a powerful voice in the prosecution case, testifying with composure and detail that impressed everyone in the courtroom. She described the months of feeling watched and unsafe, the discovery that her digital life had been completely compromised, and the psychological impact of learning that someone she trusted had been systematically violating her privacy. The worst part wasn't even the kidnapping, Madison told the court during her victim impact statement. It was realizing that for months, I had no privacy, no safety, no authentic relationship with someone I thought I loved. Every conversation, every moment alone, every private thought I shared with friends, it was all being monitored and recorded by someone who was supposed to care about me. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Derek was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence that reflected both the severity of his crimes and the sophisticated nature of his methods. But the case's impact extended far beyond Derek's conviction. Madison's experience sparked conversations about digital privacy, stalking laws, and the vulnerability of social media users to sophisticated predators. She became an advocate for stronger cyberstalking legislation and better training for law enforcement officers investigating technology-enabled crimes. My case was solved because I was lucky and because I had investigators who understood digital evidence, Madison said during a congressional hearing on cyberstalking. But there are countless other victims who aren't as fortunate, whose cases go unsolved because the tools and knowledge needed to investigate these crimes aren't widely available. The military also conducted a comprehensive review of how Derek had been able to abuse his security clearance and access to surveillance equipment. New protocols were implemented to monitor the use of sensitive equipment and to provide better mental health screening for personnel with access to advanced surveillance capabilities. Perhaps most importantly, Madison's courage during her captivity and her decision to fight back had probably saved her life and potentially prevented Derek from claiming additional victims. Madison Walsh's survival is a testament to human resilience and courage, Agent Chen said at a conference on victimology. But it's also a reminder that we need better systems to identify and stop digital predators before they escalate to physical violence. 6 months after her rescue from the Outer Banks cabin, Madison Walsh stood on the Virginia Beach boardwalk watching the sunrise paint the Atlantic in shades of gold and pink. It was the same view she'd loved before Derek Thompson turned her life into a nightmare, but her relationship with it had changed in ways both subtle and profound. She still ran, every morning, in fact, but never alone and never without multiple safety devices. Her sister Emma had moved to Virginia Beach to be closer to her, and they ran together most mornings, their conversations ranging from business plans to trauma recovery to the small victories that marked Madison's gradual return to normalcy. Tidal Strength had reopened with enhanced security measures and a new focus on personal safety training alongside fitness instruction. Madison had added self-defense classes to her offerings, taught by instructors who specialized in helping trauma survivors reclaim their sense of physical agency. I don't want to live in fear, Madison explained to a reporter who was writing a follow-up story about her recovery. But I also won't pretend that the world is as safe as I used to think it was. There's a difference between paranoia and reasonable caution. The studio's clientele had actually grown since Madison's story became public. Women from across the region came not just for fitness training but for the sense of community and empowerment that Madison had cultivated. Many of them had their own stories of feeling watched, stalked, or unsafe, experiences that were often dismissed or minimized until Madison's case showed how real and dangerous these threats could be. Derek Thompson remained in federal prison, serving his sentence in protective custody due to the nature of his crimes. His appeals had been exhausted, and psychological evaluations showed little improvement in his condition. He continued to write letters to Madison, letters that were intercepted by prison officials and never delivered, maintaining his delusion that their relationship had been consensual and that he had been unjustly persecuted. Madison knew about the letters but chose not to read them. Part of her healing process had involved accepting that she would never understand Derek's motivations or receive any meaningful explanation for what he had done to her. "I spent months trying to figure out how I missed the signs, how someone I trusted could be so dangerous," she said during a victim advocacy workshop. "But I finally realized that his deception wasn't a failure on my part, it was a skill he had developed and practiced. The fault lies entirely with him." The broader impact of Madison's case continued to ripple through law enforcement, technology, and policy circles. The techniques Derek had used to stalk and monitor Madison had been incorporated into training programs for police officers and federal agents. Social media companies had implemented new features to help users detect unauthorized access to their accounts and unusual monitoring activities. The fitness tracker that had helped save Madison's life became a symbol of how technology could be both a vulnerability and a protection. Madison worked with the manufacturer to develop new safety features specifically designed for people who felt they might be at risk of stalking or abduction. But perhaps the most important change was in how cases like Madison's were investigated and prosecuted. The comprehensive digital forensics work that had been crucial to Derek's conviction became a model for other departments, and funding was allocated to train more investigators in advanced cyberstalking techniques. Detective Castellanos, who had led the investigation, reflected on the case during a training session for new investigators. "Madison Walsh's case taught us that modern stalking is often invisible until it becomes violent," he said. "The perpetrator can live inside the victim's digital life for months without detection, gathering intelligence and planning attacks with military precision. We need to be as sophisticated in our investigations as the criminals are in their methods." Agent Chen, who had coordinated the federal response, emphasized the importance of taking digital stalking seriously from the first report. "Too often, we don't recognize the severity of cyberstalking until it escalates to physical violence," she explained. Madison Walsh was fortunate that she survived her ordeal, but we can't rely on victims to fight their way out of these situations. Prevention and early intervention are critical. Madison herself had become a reluctant but effective spokesperson for victims of technology-enabled crimes. She spoke at conferences, consulted with law enforcement agencies, and worked with legislators to strengthen cyberstalking laws. "I never wanted to be the face of this issue," she admitted during one such appearance. "But if my experience can help other people recognize the warning signs or help investigators solve similar cases, then something good comes from something terrible." Her relationship with Derek's other potential victims had evolved into a support network that extended far beyond their shared experience with one predator. Jennifer Martinez, Rebecca Santos, and the other women Derek had been stalking had formed connections that helped all of them process their experiences and reclaim their sense of safety. "We call ourselves the almost victims," Jennifer explained. "It sounds dark, but it's actually empowering. We're the ones who got away, who recognized the danger in time, who can help other people avoid what we went through." The group met monthly, sometimes for formal support sessions, sometimes just for dinner and conversation. They had developed their own informal network for sharing safety information and had even consulted on several other stalking cases where their insights proved valuable. Emma Walsh, Madison's sister, had perhaps the most unique perspective on the long-term effects of the case. Having survived cancer in her teens, she understood both trauma and recovery in ways that proved invaluable to Madison's healing process. The thing about surviving something terrible is that it changes how you see everything, Emma reflected. When I was sick, Madison learned that bad things happen to good people for no reason. Now she's learning that you can survive those bad things and still build a good life. As Madison stood on the boardwalk that morning, watching the sun rise over the Atlantic, she thought about how much had changed in the months since her rescue. The physical injuries had healed quickly, but the psychological recovery was ongoing and probably always would be. She had learned to trust her instincts again, to distinguish between reasonable caution and paralyzing fear. She had rebuilt her sense of privacy and personal space, though she remained more aware than most people of how vulnerable we all are in the digital age. Most importantly, she had discovered reserves of strength and courage that she hadn't known she possessed. The woman who had fought her way out of Derek Thompson's cabin was different from the woman who had been abducted during a morning run, stronger, more aware, less trusting but not less hopeful. "I'm not the same person I was before," Madison said during her final interview about the case. "I can't be. But I'm not a victim anymore either. I'm a survivor who's choosing to build something meaningful from a terrible experience." As she finished her morning run and headed back to open tidal strength for another day of helping people become stronger and safer, Madison Walsh carried with her the knowledge that healing is possible, that justice sometimes prevails, and that the human capacity for resilience can overcome even the most sophisticated forms of predation. The sunrise over Virginia Beach looked exactly the same as it had before Derek Thompson entered her life. But Madison saw it differently now, not as something to be enjoyed innocently, but as something to be grateful for, something earned through survival and courage. It was a view worth fighting for, and she had. If you're still awake and listening, please don't forget to comment where you're listening from and the current time in your corner of the world. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss our daily true crime stories for sleep. Now, let's move on to our next story. Story 2. Gabby Petito was the kind of young woman who lit up every room she entered. Born on March 19, 1999, in Blue Point, New York, she had moved to Florida with dreams as big as the open road stretching before her. At 22, she stood just 5 feet 5 inches tall, with blonde hair that caught the sunlight and blue eyes that sparkled with wanderlust. Gabby worked at a local juice bar in Northport, but her real passion lay in travel and photography. She spent hours curating her Instagram account, at Gabs Petito, sharing glimpses of her life with her growing following. Her posts were filled with golden hour selfies, inspirational quotes about adventure, and dreams of van life, that increasingly popular lifestyle of converting vehicles into mobile homes and traveling the country. Brian Laundrie was 2 years younger than Gabby, born on November 18, 1997. He was a quiet, often introspective young man who had been dating Gabby on and off for over 2 years. Their relationship was passionate but complicated. Friends and family would later describe it as intense, with moments of deep connection punctuated by occasional friction. In early 2021, Gabby and Brian decided to take their relationship on the ultimate test, a cross-country van life adventure. They purchased a white 2012 Ford Transit van, which they converted into a mobile home. The van became their project, their sanctuary, and eventually, their prison. The conversion process took months. They installed a bed, storage compartments, and the basic necessities for life on the road. Gabby documented every step on social media, her excitement palpable in every post. Van life or no life, she would caption her photos, using hashtags like #vanlife and #nomadlife. Their plan was ambitious. They would travel across the American West, visiting national parks, camping under starlit skies, and documenting their journey for Gabby's growing social media presence. She dreamed of becoming a travel blogger, maybe even landing sponsorship deals. This trip was supposed to be the beginning of their new life together. On July 2, 2021, Gabby and Brian officially began their cross-country adventure. Their white Ford Transit van, affectionately nicknamed the Van in Gabby's posts, pulled out of Northport, Florida, loaded with dreams and supplies for what was planned to be a 4-month journey. Their first major stop was in Kansas, where they visited Brian's sister Cassie and her family. The visit seemed pleasant enough. Family photos showed the couple smiling, Gabby playing with Brian's young nephews. But even then, there were subtle signs that not everything was perfect in paradise. From Kansas, they headed west toward Colorado. Gabby's Instagram posts from this period show breathtaking landscapes, endless skies, mountain vistas, and the couple looking happy in their photos. But social media, as we all know, often tells only part of the story. Their route took them through Colorado Springs, where they hiked and explored. Gabby posted a photo of herself doing yoga on a rock formation, captioned, "Finding my balance." They visited the Great Sand Dunes National Park, where Gabby's joy seemed genuine in photos of her running barefoot through the sand. From Colorado, they traveled to Utah, the state that would become central to their story. Utah's national parks were on every van life enthusiast's bucket list: Arches, Canyonlands, Capitol Reef, Bryce Canyon, and Zion. For young adventurers like Gabby and Brian, Utah represented the ultimate van life destination. They arrived in Moab, Utah, on August 12, 2021. Moab is a small desert town that serves as the gateway to Arches and Canyonlands National Parks. With its red rock formations, stunning desert landscapes, and outdoor adventure opportunities, it attracts thousands of visitors every year. But August 12th would become a date that would haunt this case forever. Because on that sweltering summer day in Moab, something happened that would set in motion a chain of events leading to tragedy. It was approximately 4:30 p.m. on August 12, 2021, when a 911 call came into the Grand County Sheriff's Office in Moab, Utah. The caller reported a domestic dispute involving a white van and a young couple. The caller described seeing a man slapping a woman, and the situation appeared to be escalating. When Officer Eric Pratt of the Moab Police Department responded to the call, he spotted the white Ford Transit van traveling north on Main Street. The van was speeding and swerving, showing clear signs of erratic driving. Officer Pratt initiated a traffic stop near the entrance to Arches National Park. What happened next was captured on police body camera footage that would later be analyzed frame by millions of viewers. As Officer Pratt approached the van, he found 22-year-old Gabby Petito in an extremely emotional state. She was crying, hyperventilating, and clearly distressed. "We've been fighting all morning," Gabby told the officer through her tears. She explained that she and Brian had been under stress, that she'd been working on her blog and website, and that the pressure of the trip and living in such close quarters had been getting to both of them. Brian Laundrie appeared calm and collected when speaking with the officers. He was polite, cooperative, and presented himself as the more level-headed of the two. He told officers that Gabby had been having what he called episodes, periods of anxiety and emotional distress that had been affecting their relationship. The body camera footage shows Gabby taking responsibility for the physical altercation. She told officers that she had hit Brian first, that she was the aggressor in the situation. She explained that she had grabbed the steering wheel while he was driving, which had caused the erratic driving that led to the traffic stop. But there were details in the police report that painted a more complex picture. Witnesses had reported seeing Brian grab Gabby's face and push her back before the physical altercation occurred. There were visible scratches on Brian's face and arm, which he claimed were from Gabby hitting him. The officers faced a difficult decision. Technically, based on Utah law and Gabby's admission that she had struck Brian first, she could have been arrested for domestic violence. However, the officers ultimately decided to separate the couple for the night rather than make an arrest. Gabby spent the night in the van at a local hotel parking lot, while Brian was given a free night at a local motel. The officers' report classified the incident as a mental health break rather than domestic violence, a decision that would later be heavily scrutinized. The next morning, August 13th, the couple reunited and continued their journey. To the outside world, through Gabby's social media posts, everything appeared to return to normal. She posted photos of beautiful Utah landscapes, selfies with bright smiles, and captions about gratitude and adventure. But for those who knew how to read between the lines, the cracks were beginning to show. Following the Moab incident, Gabby and Brian continued their journey through Utah's stunning national parks. For the next 2 weeks, Gabby's social media presence continued, though those who knew her well would later say the posts seemed different, more forced, less spontaneous. On August 19th, Gabby posted a photo from Canyonlands National Park. She's sitting on the edge of a cliff, arms raised toward the sky, with the caption, "Happy Halloween." It was a quirky, vintage-style photo that seemed to capture her free spirit. But it would be one of her last authentic posts. Around August 17th, the couple had traveled to Salt Lake City, where they spent several days. During this time, Brian flew back to Florida alone, ostensibly to help his parents move items out of a storage unit and clear out their home office so he could move in upon their return from the road trip. Gabby stayed behind in Salt Lake City, staying in a hotel by herself. This separation raised questions that would never be fully answered. Why did Brian need to fly back to Florida for what seemed like a simple moving task? Why couldn't it wait until their return? Friends and family noted that this seemed unusual for the couple, who had been essentially inseparable since starting their journey. Brian returned to Salt Lake City on August 23rd, and the couple resumed their travels. Their next destination was Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming, followed by Yellowstone National Park. These were to be the crown jewels of their van life adventure. On August 25th, Gabby posted what would become her final Instagram post. It was a photo of herself holding a small pumpkin, taken at a farmer's market in Utah. The caption read, "Happy Halloween. It's the little things." The post seemed innocent enough, but later analysis would reveal inconsistencies that suggested it might not have been posted by Gabby herself. The last confirmed communication from Gabby came in a text message to her mother, Nicole Schmidt, on August 27th. The message read, "Can you help Stan? I just keep getting his voicemails and missed calls." Stan was Gabby's grandfather, but the reference was odd. Gabby had never referred to her grandfather by his first name before. She always called him Grandpa. Nicole Schmidt would later say this text message immediately raised red flags. The language didn't sound like Gabby, and the request was unusual. Schmidt tried calling and texting back immediately, but received no response. On August 30th, another text was sent from Gabby's phone, "No service in Yosemite." This message was even more concerning because Gabby and Brian were supposed to be in Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming, not Yosemite in California. These would be the last communications from Gabby's phone. Somewhere in the vast wilderness of Wyoming, in the shadow of the Grand Teton Mountains, a young woman's dream adventure had become a nightmare. And as August faded into September, the silence from Gabby would become deafening. September 1st, 2021, was a day that would forever be etched in the memories of the Petito and Schmidt families. On that quiet Wednesday morning, a white Ford Transit van pulled into the driveway of the Laundrie family home at 2926 Bayshore Drive in Northport, Florida. But something was terribly wrong with this homecoming. The van that had left Florida 2 months earlier carrying 2 young adventurers had returned with only one occupant, Brian Laundrie. Brian's parents, Christopher and Roberta Laundrie, welcomed their son home without any apparent concern about Gabby's absence. To the neighbors who might have noticed, it appeared to be a normal family reunion. Brian helped unload items from the van, the family gathered for dinner, and life resumed its regular rhythm at the Laundrie household. But 1,200 miles away in New York, Gabby's family was growing increasingly worried. Nicole Schmidt, Gabby's mother, had not heard from her daughter since that strange text message on August 30th about being in Yosemite. Every call to Gabby's phone went straight to voicemail. Every text message went unanswered. What made the silence even more troubling was that it was completely out of character for Gabby. She was the type of person who stayed in constant communication with her family, often sending multiple texts a day with photos, updates, and random thoughts. The sudden radio silence was alarm bells screaming in the darkness. Nicole Schmidt tried a different approach. She reached out to Brian Laundrie directly, sending texts and making phone calls to ask about Gabby's whereabouts. But Brian didn't respond to any of her attempts at communication. She tried contacting Brian's parents, but they too remained silent. For 10 agonizing days, the Petito and Schmidt families were left in limbo. They had no idea where Gabby was, if she was safe, or why no one from the Laundrie family would respond to their increasingly desperate pleas for information. During this time, Brian Laundrie was living a seemingly normal life at his parents' home. Neighbors would later report seeing him doing yard work, going for bike rides, and helping his father with household projects. He appeared calm and unbothered by the growing concerns about his missing fiancée. The Laundrie family's behavior during this period would later become a source of intense scrutiny and criticism. They had clearly been told something about Gabby's absence, yet they made no effort to contact her family or assist in any search efforts. Their silence was deafening and, to many observers, deeply troubling. On September 10, Nicole Schmidt had reached her breaking point. With still no word from Gabby or the Laundrie family, she made a decision that would launch one of the most high-profile missing person cases in recent American history. She contacted the Suffolk County Police Department in New York and filed a missing person report for her daughter. The wheels of justice were finally beginning to turn, but precious time had already been lost. 10 days had passed since Brian Laundrie returned home alone. 10 days during which crucial evidence could have been preserved, witnesses could have been interviewed, and search efforts could have begun. As September 10 faded into evening, Gabby Petito was officially classified as a missing person. Somewhere in the American West, a young woman's fate remained unknown, while the man who might hold the answers to her disappearance remained silent in a Florida suburb. Once Gabby Petito was officially reported missing on September 10, 2021, law enforcement agencies across multiple states began coordinating what would become a massive search effort. The FBI's Denver office took the lead on the case, given that Gabby was last known to be in Wyoming. The first major break came from analyzing Gabby's social media presence and digital footprint. Investigators were able to trace the couple's movements through Gabby's Instagram posts, credit card transactions, and cell phone data. This digital trail painted a picture of their journey and helped narrow down the search area. On September 11, Northport police visited the Laundrie family home to ask about Gabby's disappearance. This was when the family's behavior became even more troubling. Instead of speaking with police directly, the Laundries referred them to their attorney, Stephen Bertolino, who provided a brief statement but no useful information about Gabby's whereabouts. The attorney's statement was cold and legalistic. The advice of counsel is that Mr. Laundrie remain in the background at this juncture and allow the FBI to come forward with the information they feel is appropriate to disseminate to the public. This response outraged Gabby's family and the growing number of people following the case online. Here was a young woman missing in the wilderness, and the person who was with her was refusing to help with the search efforts. It seemed incomprehensible to many observers. On September 14, Brian Laundrie was officially named a person of interest in Gabby's disappearance. This designation meant that while he wasn't formally a suspect, investigators wanted to speak with him about what he knew regarding Gabby's last known movements. But Brian's cooperation was not forthcoming. Through his attorney, he continued to assert his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and refused to speak with investigators. This legal right, while constitutional, struck many people as morally questionable when a person's life was potentially at stake. Meanwhile, social media had exploded with interest in the case. The hashtag #FindGabbyPetito began trending on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Amateur internet sleuths began analyzing every photo, every social media post, and every piece of available information about the couple's journey. Some of these amateur investigators actually provided valuable assistance to law enforcement. They identified locations in background photos, found witness accounts, and helped map the couple's movements across the western United States. One particular social media user, Miranda Baker, came forward with crucial information. She posted a TikTok video explaining that she had given Brian Laundrie a ride near Grand Teton National Park on August 29. According to Baker, Brian had been hitchhiking alone and seemed agitated when she mentioned going to Jackson Hole, asking to be let out of the vehicle immediately. This account was significant because it placed Brian in the Grand Teton area around the time of Gabby's last known communications, and it suggested he was alone and possibly in distress. As the search efforts intensified, the FBI began focusing on Grand Teton National Park and the surrounding Bridger Teton National Forest. These vast wilderness areas encompassed hundreds of thousands of acres of rugged terrain, including dense forests, alpine lakes, and challenging mountain terrain. Search teams included FBI agents, local law enforcement, search and rescue volunteers, and specialized K-9 units. They used helicopters, drones, and ground teams to cover as much territory as possible. But finding one person in such a vast wilderness was like looking for a needle in a haystack. On September 17, the case took another dramatic turn. Northport police arrived at the Laundrie family home to execute a search warrant and found something that would shock investigators and the public alike: Brian Laundrie was gone. According to his parents, Brian had left on September 14 to go hiking in the Carlton Reserve, a 25,000-acre wilderness area near their home. He had taken a backpack and told them he was going for a hike, but he never returned home. Now law enforcement was faced with not one missing person, but two. Gabby Petito remained missing somewhere in Wyoming, while Brian Laundrie had vanished into the Florida wilderness. The case that had already captured national attention was about to become even more complex and tragic. September 19, 2021, dawned clear and crisp in the mountains of Wyoming. FBI search teams had been combing the Grand Teton National Park area for days, following up on tips, witness accounts, and digital evidence that suggested Gabby and Brian had been in this area in late August. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a family of YouTubers called Red, White, and Bethune, who had been camping in the Bridger Teton National Forest on August 27. They had been filming their camping adventure, and later, after hearing about the search for Gabby, they reviewed their footage. In the background of one of their videos, barely visible in the distance, was a white van parked in an area known as the Spread Creek Dispersed Camping Area. The van appeared to be a Ford Transit, matching the description of Gabby and Brian's converted home on wheels. This video evidence helped focus the search efforts on a specific area of the vast wilderness. On September 19, search teams concentrated their efforts around Spread Creek, an area popular with dispersed campers who prefer to camp outside of established campgrounds. At approximately 3:40 p.m. Mountain Time, FBI investigators discovered what they had been searching for, but not what they had hoped to find. Human remains were located in the Bridger Teton National Forest, in an area consistent with the location of the white van seen in the YouTube video. The discovery was made in a remote area, several hundred yards from where the van had been parked. The remains were found near a makeshift fire ring, in an area that showed signs of recent camping activity. The FBI immediately secured the scene and called in forensic specialists. The area was treated as a potential crime scene, with investigators carefully documenting every detail, photographing the location, and collecting potential evidence. That evening, the FBI held a press conference to announce the discovery. Special Agent in Charge Michael Schneider spoke to gathered media. Earlier today, human remains were discovered in the Bridger Teton National Forest in Wyoming by law enforcement agents conducting a search for Gabby Petito in the area. The remains were found in an area where a scattered camp and a fire ring were located. While the FBI could not immediately confirm the identity of the remains, the location and circumstances strongly suggested they had found Gabby Petito. For her family, who had held on to hope for weeks, this news was devastating. The discovery sent shockwaves across the nation. Millions of people who had been following the case through social media felt a collective grief for a young woman they had never met but whose story had touched their hearts. On September 21, 2021, the Teton County Coroner's Office officially confirmed what everyone feared: the remains found in the Wyoming wilderness were those of 22-year-old Gabby Petito. Dr. Brent Blue, the Teton County coroner, announced that the manner of death was homicide, though the specific cause of death would not be released immediately pending further investigation. The confirmation that Gabby had been murdered turned a missing person case into a homicide investigation. The news of Gabby's death was met with an outpouring of grief from around the world. Her family released a statement: "We want to thank the FBI and other law enforcement for their dedication and tireless efforts in finding Gabby. We ask that you all give us time to process this incredibly difficult time and give us space to grieve." But even as the nation mourned for Gabby, another mystery was deepening in the swamps of Florida, where Brian Laundrie remained missing and the subject of an increasingly intense manhunt. With Gabby's death confirmed as a homicide, the search for Brian Laundrie took on new urgency. He was no longer just a person of interest in a missing person case, he was now the primary suspect in a murder investigation. On September 23, 2021, a federal arrest warrant was issued for Brian Laundrie. The charge was for the unauthorized use of Gabby's debit card and credit cards after her death, transactions that totaled more than $1,000 between August 30 and September 1. While this wasn't a murder charge, it gave law enforcement the legal authority to arrest him. The search for Brian Laundrie became one of the most intensive manhunts in recent American history. The Carlton Reserve in Florida, where his parents claimed he had gone hiking, became the focus of massive search efforts involving hundreds of law enforcement officers, search dogs, helicopters, drones, and specialized swamp vehicles. The 25,000-acre reserve was a challenging search environment, with dense vegetation, swampland, alligators, and venomous snakes. Search teams worked in grueling conditions, following up on tips and searching areas where Brian might have gone to ground. For weeks, the search continued with no sign of Brian Laundrie. Reported sightings came in from across the country, but none proved credible. The FBI received thousands of tips, each one requiring investigation and follow-up. The case had become a national obsession. Cable news channels provided round-the-clock coverage, protesters gathered outside the Laundrie family home, and social media was filled with theories, speculation, and demands for justice. On October 12, 2021, Dr. Brent Blue, the Teton County coroner, released additional details about Gabby's death. He announced that she had died by manual strangulation, and that her body had been in the wilderness for 3 to 4 weeks before it was discovered. The brutality of the crime shocked even those who had been following the case closely. The manhunt for Brian Laundrie continued into October, with no sign of the fugitive. Some speculated that he had fled the country, others believed he was hiding with assistance from family or friends, and still others thought he had died by suicide in the vast Florida wilderness. On October 20, 2021, the search came to its tragic conclusion. Chris and Roberta Laundrie, accompanied by law enforcement, went to the Carlton Reserve to search an area that had recently reopened after being underwater due to flooding. In the Myakkahatchee Creek Environmental Park, adjacent to the Carlton Reserve, they found a backpack and notebook belonging to Brian Laundrie. Nearby, they discovered human remains that were later confirmed through dental records to be those of Brian Laundrie. The cause of Brian's death was determined to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He had apparently died by suicide, taking with him any chance of getting answers about what exactly happened to Gabby in those final days in Wyoming. In January 2022, the FBI released a statement saying that Brian Laundrie was the only person responsible for Gabby's death, effectively closing the criminal investigation. However, this conclusion brought little comfort to Gabby's family, who were left with countless unanswered questions about their daughter's final days. The case of Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie became more than just a true crime story. It sparked conversations about domestic violence, the dangers that can lurk behind social media's perfect facades, and the importance of recognizing warning signs in relationships. Gabby's family established the Gabby Petito Foundation to help other families facing similar situations and to raise awareness about domestic violence. Her legacy became one of helping others, even in death. As we conclude this story tonight, with the gentle rain continuing to fall, we remember Gabby Petito not as a victim, but as a young woman who dreamed of adventure, who loved life, and who touched the hearts of millions around the world. Her story serves as a reminder that behind every missing person case is a family desperate for answers, and that sometimes the most dangerous place can be right beside someone you trust. The van life dream that began with such hope and excitement ended in tragedy in the wilderness of Wyoming. But Gabby's spirit lives on in the foundation that bears her name, in the awareness her story has raised, and in the hearts of all who remember her not for how she died, but for how she lived. And if you're still awake and listening, please don't forget to comment where you're listening from and the current time in your corner of the world. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss our daily true crime stories for sleep. Now, let's move on to our next story. Story 3. Tonight, we travel to the quiet college town of Moscow, Idaho, where the rolling hills of the Palouse meet the peaceful rhythms of university life. It's a story that begins with friendship, dreams, and the simple joys of being young and full of hope. But on one cold November night in 2022, the tranquility of this small town would be shattered forever. For bright young lives would be cut short in a tragedy that would capture the attention of the entire nation and leave a community forever changed. To understand the tragedy that befell the house on King Road, we must first understand the beautiful lives that were lived within its walls. Our story begins with two girls who met in the 6th grade and discovered a friendship that would define both of their lives. Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogan first crossed paths in the halls of Lake City High School in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. They were friends since 6th grade, two young souls who instantly connected over shared dreams, inside jokes, and the kind of loyalty that only comes from growing up together. Kaylee was the kind of person who lit up every room she entered. Throughout all of her years of education, Kaylee maintained incredible grades and made friends wherever she went. She was known for her infectious laugh, her fierce loyalty to those she loved, and her determination to make the most of every single day. At 21 years old, she stood as a senior at the University of Idaho, majoring in general studies with plans that seemed to change as often as the Idaho seasons, each new idea more exciting than the last. Madison, or Maddie as everyone called her, was Kaylee's perfect complement. Where Kaylee was the spark, Maddie was the steady flame. Also 21, she shared Kaylee's love of adventure but brought a calming presence to their friendship. Teachers remembered both women as having big, bright souls, the kind of students who made teaching worthwhile. The two had been inseparable through high school graduation in 2019, and when it came time for college, there was never any question that they would continue their journey together. The University of Idaho in Moscow became their next chapter, a place where they could spread their wings while still having each other to lean on. Moscow, Idaho, is the kind of college town that exists in the American imagination: tree-lined streets, historic buildings, and a campus that feels like a community unto itself. With a population of just over 25,000, it swells each fall when students arrive for the semester, bringing energy and life to the quiet farming community nestled in the rolling hills of the Palouse. For Kaylee and Maddie, college life was everything they had hoped it would be. They joined sororities, made new friends, and began to build the kind of memories that were supposed to last a lifetime. They lived together, shared clothes, shared secrets, and shared dreams about what their lives would look like after graduation. By their senior year, they had settled into a rhythm that felt comfortable and right. They shared a bedroom in a house at 1122 King Road, a typical college rental in a neighborhood full of similar houses where students created their own small communities away from home. The house on King Road was a 3-story structure that had seen countless students come and go over the years. It was the kind of place where late-night study sessions turned into deep conversations, where friendships were forged over shared meals, and where the future always seemed bright and full of possibility. But Kaylee and Maddie weren't the only ones calling this house home. The house at 1122 King Road was home to 6 University of Idaho students, each bringing their own story, their own dreams, and their own place in this tragic tale. Beyond Kaylee and Maddie, who shared the top-floor bedroom, the house was home to 4 other young people navigating the complexities of college life. Xana Kernadel was 20 years old, a junior at the university studying marketing. She had that rare combination of academic dedication and social warmth that made her beloved by both professors and fellow students. Xana lived on the second floor of the house, in a room that she had decorated with the care of someone who understood that home is what you make it, not just where you sleep. Xana had been dating Ethan Chapin for some time, and their relationship was the kind that made their friends believe in love. Ethan was also 20, a sophomore studying recreation, sport, and tourism management. He was known for his kind heart, his easy smile, and his devotion to Xana. Though he lived in the Sigma Chi fraternity house, he spent most of his time at the King Road house, having essentially become part of the family that lived there. The house was also home to two other roommates who lived on the first floor. These two young women would become central to the investigation that followed, not as victims, but as survivors who would have to live with the trauma of that night for the rest of their lives. The arrangement worked well for all of them. Like most college houses, it was a place where individual lives intersected in beautiful and messy ways. There were shared meals and shared responsibilities, late-night conversations and early morning classes. It was a place where young adults were learning to be independent while still having the safety net of friendship and community. November 12, 2022, was a Saturday night, and like many Saturday nights in a college town, it was filled with the kind of activities that define the university experience. There were parties to attend, friends to see, and memories to make. For the residents of 1122 King Road, it would be their last normal night together. Kaylee and Maddie had decided to spend their Saturday evening downtown at the Corner Club, a local bar popular with university students. It was the kind of place where you could count on seeing familiar faces, where the music was loud enough to dance to but not so loud you couldn't catch up with friends. The two best friends got ready together, sharing clothes and makeup, taking selfies, and anticipating a fun night out. Security footage would later show them walking through downtown Moscow, arm in arm, laughing and talking as they made their way between venues. Surveillance video appears to show Kaylee Goncalves and Maddie Mogan walking in Moscow hours before they were killed. Meanwhile, Xana and Ethan had spent their evening at a Sigma Chi party. Friends would later describe them as being happy and relaxed, enjoying time with their fraternity friends and looking forward to the rest of their weekend. Ethan, despite living at the fraternity house, had planned to spend the night at King Road with Xana, as he often did. By all accounts, it was a typical Saturday night for college students. There was nothing to suggest that danger was lurking, nothing to indicate that this would be anything other than another weekend night filled with laughter, friendship, and the simple joy of being young and alive. The four friends would all return to 1122 King Road that night, each taking different paths home, each anticipating nothing more than a good night's sleep before facing whatever Sunday might bring. None of them could have imagined that they were walking into the final hours of their lives, or that their names would soon be known across the nation for the most tragic of reasons. As the night wore on and Moscow settled into the quiet hours before dawn, the house on King Road held 6 young people, all of whom believed they were safe in their home, surrounded by friends, with their whole lives ahead of them. The early hours of November 13, 2022, unfolded like countless other Sunday mornings in college towns across America. Students were returning home from various Saturday night activities, some calling it an early night, others extending their evening into the small hours of the morning. Kaylee and Maddie had left the Corner Club around 1:30 a.m., making their way to a late-night food truck called the Grub Truck, a Moscow institution that served hungry college students during the weekend late-night hours. The food truck was located on Main Street, and it was the kind of place where students would gather after the bars closed, sharing stories from the night and satisfying late-night cravings. Security footage from the food truck would later show the two best friends ordering food, chatting with other students, and appearing to be in good spirits. They seemed relaxed and happy, just two college seniors enjoying a typical weekend night. There was nothing in their demeanor to suggest they felt threatened or unsafe. Around 1:56 a.m., Kaylee and Maddie caught a ride home through a private party service that was popular with students. The ride was brief, just a few minutes through the quiet streets of Moscow to their house on King Road. By approximately 2 a.m., they were safely inside their home, probably looking forward to getting some sleep. Meanwhile, Xana and Ethan had also made their way back to King Road from the Sigma Chi party. They arrived at the house around the same time as Kaylee and Maddie, the four friends converging on their shared home as the night transitioned into early morning. The house settled into what should have been peaceful sleep. The four victims were stabbed to death on the second and third floors of the residence, where they had been in bed. The two roommates on the first floor were also home, and the house contained 6 young people, all believing they were safe in their shared sanctuary. What happened next would forever change not just the lives of those in the house, but the entire community of Moscow, Idaho. Preliminary autopsy results show that the 4 victims were likely attacked with a large knife and died sometime after 2 a.m. The attack was swift and brutal, occurring while the victims were at their most vulnerable. Police say the victims were most likely asleep when they were attacked. The house, which had been filled with the quiet sounds of young people settling in for the night, became the scene of an unimaginable tragedy. The killer moved through the house with a purpose that would later terrify investigators. Mogan and Goncalves were found in Mogan's bedroom, and Kernodle and Chapin were found in Kernodle's room. The best friends who had shared so much of their lives together were found together in death, their final moments spent in the room where they had shared countless conversations about their dreams and plans for the future. The victims were not gagged or restrained, and the walls at the scene were spattered with blood. The violence of the attack shocked even experienced investigators who had seen many crime scenes throughout their careers. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of this tragedy was its randomness. These were not people involved in dangerous activities or risky lifestyles. They were ordinary college students living ordinary lives, believing they were safe in their own home. The attack seemed to come from nowhere, targeting 4 young people who had done nothing to deserve such a fate. As dawn broke over Moscow on November 13, 2022, the house on King Road held secrets that would soon rock a community and captivate a nation. But for several more hours, the world remained unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded in the quiet hours before sunrise. Sunday, November 13, 2022, dawned crisp and clear in Moscow, Idaho. It was the kind of autumn day that makes the Palouse region famous, golden light filtering through bare tree branches, the promise of winter in the air, and the peaceful quiet that settles over college towns on Sunday mornings. For most residents of Moscow, it was a day that began like any other. Coffee shops opened to serve students cramming for exams, families prepared for church services, and the rhythms of small-town life continued their familiar patterns. No one could have imagined that this Sunday would become a day that would divide their community's history into before and after. As the morning progressed into afternoon, concern began to grow among friends and family of the residents of 1122 King Road. Phone calls went unanswered, text messages remained unread, and plans that had been made for Sunday activities went unfulfilled. By early afternoon, friends of the roommates had become worried enough to come to the house to check on them. They knew it wasn't like their friends to be completely unreachable, especially when they had made plans for the day. College students might sleep in after a Saturday night out, but they typically responded to calls and messages by afternoon. At approximately 11:58 a.m., a 911 call was placed from the King Road house. The caller reported an unconscious person, though the exact details of that call would later become a subject of intense scrutiny and investigation. What is known is that the call brought Moscow police to a scene that would haunt them for years to come. When officers arrived at 1122 King Road, they encountered a scene of unimaginable horror. The house that had been filled with laughter, friendship, and dreams just hours before had become the site of a quadruple homicide that would shake the foundations of this peaceful college community. Kaylee, her lifelong best friend and roommate Madison Mogan, a third roommate, Xana Kernodle, and Kernodle's boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, were stabbed to death inside the girls' off-campus house. 2 other roommates survived the shocking crime. The 2 surviving roommates, who had been on the first floor during the attack, were found unharmed but traumatized beyond measure. They would later be cleared as suspects, but they would carry the psychological scars of that night for the rest of their lives. The scene that investigators encountered was one of extreme violence. The victims were likely stabbed multiple times in their sleep mere days before Thanksgiving break. The randomness and brutality of the attack sent shockwaves through the investigating team and the community at large. Moscow Police Chief James Fry would later describe the scene as one of the most challenging his department had ever encountered. The small college town, which typically dealt with noise complaints and minor infractions, was suddenly facing a quadruple homicide that would require resources and expertise far beyond their normal scope. As news of the murders spread through Moscow and beyond, the reaction was immediate and intense. The University of Idaho campus was placed on lockdown, students were advised to shelter in place, and parents across the country began frantically calling their college-aged children to make sure they were safe. Social media exploded with speculation, fear, and disbelief. How could something like this happen in Moscow, Idaho? Who could have committed such a heinous act? And most frighteningly of all, was the killer still out there? The investigation that followed would become one of the most closely watched criminal cases in recent American history, involving multiple law enforcement agencies, advanced forensic techniques, and a level of public scrutiny that few cases have ever experienced. But as the sun set on November 13, 2022, all that was certain was that 4 bright young lives had been cut short, 2 families had been shattered, a community had been traumatized, and somewhere out there, a killer walked free. In the hours and days following the discovery of the bodies at 1122 King Road, Moscow, Idaho, transformed from a sleepy college town into the epicenter of one of the most closely watched criminal investigations in recent memory. The small community, unaccustomed to such violence, struggled to process what had happened within their borders. The University of Idaho's campus, normally bustling with students heading to classes and social activities, became eerily quiet. The shocking crime garnered national intrigue, and suddenly this remote college town found itself under an international spotlight it had never sought. Moscow police, working alongside Idaho State Police and the FBI, established a massive crime scene at the King Road house. The investigation required a level of forensic expertise that extended far beyond what the local department typically handled. Federal agents, crime scene specialists, and forensic experts descended on the quiet residential street, turning it into a hub of investigative activity. The house itself became a fortress of yellow tape and law enforcement vehicles. Neighbors, many of whom were also college students, found themselves living next to an active crime scene, a constant reminder of the violence that had shattered their sense of security. Chief James Fry faced the enormous challenge of leading an investigation that had captured national attention while managing a community gripped by fear. At press conferences that were broadcast live across the country, he tried to balance the need for public information with the integrity of the ongoing investigation. The lack of immediate answers fueled speculation and fear throughout the community. Students began traveling in groups, parents pleaded with their children to come home, and local businesses reported a significant drop in foot traffic as people avoided going out after dark. The investigation team faced several immediate challenges. The walls at the scene were spattered with blood, indicating the extreme violence of the attack, but there were few obvious clues pointing to the perpetrator's identity. The killer had somehow entered and exited the house without leaving behind clear evidence of their identity. Investigators began the painstaking process of collecting physical evidence, interviewing potential witnesses, and reconstructing the timeline of that tragic night. They collected DNA samples, fingerprints, digital evidence from phones and computers, and began the process of analyzing the victim's final hours. The media attention was unprecedented for a case in Idaho. National news trucks lined the streets of Moscow, reporters from major networks broadcast live from outside the crime scene, and true crime enthusiasts on social media began their own amateur investigations. This level of attention created both opportunities and challenges for the investigation. While the publicity helped generate tips and potential leads from across the country, it also created pressure for quick results and led to the spread of misinformation and speculation that sometimes hindered the investigation. The victims' families, already dealing with unimaginable grief, found themselves thrust into a public spotlight they had never wanted. Parents of the University of Idaho victims struggled to balance their need for privacy and their grief with their desire to keep their children's cases in the public eye. Kaylee's family, in particular, became vocal advocates for the investigation, giving interviews and making public statements urging anyone with information to come forward. Their pain was visible and raw, and it humanized the case for millions of people following the story. As weeks passed without an arrest, the pressure on investigators intensified. The community demanded answers, the media demanded updates, and the families demanded justice. But the investigation team, led by experienced detectives who understood the importance of building a solid case, continued their methodical work despite the external pressure. The case became a fixture on true crime podcasts, social media discussions, and cable news programs. Amateur sleuths analyzed every piece of public information, creating theories and timelines that sometimes helped and sometimes hindered the official investigation. Through it all, the house on King Road stood as a silent witness to the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls, its windows boarded up, its yard surrounded by police tape, a stark reminder that evil had visited this quiet college town and left 4 bright lives extinguished. As 2022 drew to a close and winter settled over Moscow, Idaho, the investigation into the King Road murders continued with the methodical pace that characterizes complex criminal cases. Behind the scenes, investigators were following hundreds of leads, analyzing thousands of pieces of evidence, and slowly building a picture of what had happened on that tragic November night. The breakthrough would come from a combination of traditional detective work and modern forensic science. Investigators had been meticulously analyzing DNA evidence collected from the crime scene, looking for any trace that didn't belong to the victims or the surviving roommates. Advanced DNA analysis techniques allowed investigators to develop a genetic profile of the suspected perpetrator. This profile was then run through various databases, including those used for genealogical research, in an attempt to identify potential suspects. Meanwhile, investigators had been analyzing other evidence from the scene and the surrounding area. Vehicle registration databases were searched, cell phone data was analyzed, and witness statements were compiled and cross-referenced. The investigation was massive in scope, involving multiple agencies and hundreds of investigators working around the clock. On December 30, 2022, the investigation took a dramatic turn. Law enforcement officers in Pennsylvania arrested 28-year-old Brian Kohberger at his parents' home in the Pocono Mountains region. Brian Kohberger is accused of killing 4 college students on November 13, 2022. Kohberger was a graduate student in criminal justice and criminology at Washington State University, located just across the state border from Moscow, Idaho. The irony of his academic focus was not lost on investigators or the public. Here was someone who had studied the very field that was now being used to investigate him. The arrest brought a sense of relief to the Moscow community, but also raised new questions. How had someone studying criminal justice allegedly committed such a brutal crime? What had motivated such violence against 4 people who, by all accounts, he had no known connection to? The evidence against Kohberger was substantial. DNA evidence allegedly linked him to the crime scene, and investigators had traced his movements through cell phone data and vehicle registrations. His white Hyundai Elantra had been identified as a vehicle of interest in the case, and records showed it had been in the Moscow area during the time of the murders. The arrest affidavit, when it was eventually released, painted a picture of a methodical investigation that had slowly closed in on Kohberger over several weeks. Investigators had been watching him for some time before making the arrest, building their case carefully to ensure they had sufficient evidence for prosecution. For the families of the victims, the arrest brought a mixture of relief and continued pain. While they were grateful that someone had been charged with their children's murders, no arrest could bring back Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan. The legal process would be long and difficult, and they knew that reliving the details of their children's final moments would be part of seeking justice. The University of Idaho community also reacted with mixed emotions. While there was relief that a suspect was in custody, the arrest couldn't erase the trauma that the community had experienced. The sense of innocence and safety that had once characterized campus life had been permanently altered. Koberger was extradited back to Idaho to face charges, and the legal proceedings began. He was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. The prosecution would seek the death penalty, arguing that the premeditated nature of the crime and the number of victims warranted the ultimate punishment. As the case moved into the legal system, the focus shifted from investigation to prosecution. The evidence would be presented in court, witnesses would testify, and a jury would ultimately decide Koberger's fate. But for now, the community could begin the long process of healing, knowing that someone was being held accountable for the tragedy that had shattered their sense of security. The house on King Road, which had stood empty since the murders, became a symbol of both tragedy and resilience. Plans were made to eventually demolish the structure, as it had become too painful a reminder for the community to bear. But the memories of the 4 young lives that had been lost there would endure forever. As the legal proceedings against Brian Koberger moved forward, the focus of the community began to shift from the horror of what had happened to the celebration of the lives that had been lost. The 4 victims of the King Road murders had been so much more than the tragedy that ended their lives, and their families and friends were determined that they be remembered for who they were, not how they died. Kaylee Goncalves, the bright young woman with dreams as big as the Idaho sky, was remembered as someone who approached life with unbridled enthusiasm. Her family shared stories of her determination, her loyalty, and her infectious laugh that could brighten any room. She had been planning to graduate early and move to Texas to start a new career, dreams that would never be fulfilled but that spoke to her ambitious spirit. Madison Mogan, Kaylee's best friend since 6th grade, was remembered as the steady, reliable presence in any group. Her friends described her as someone you could always count on, whether you needed help with homework, a shoulder to cry on, or someone to share in your celebrations. The bond between Kaylee and Maddie had been special, the kind of friendship that comes along once in a lifetime. Xana Kernadle was remembered as a young woman who had found her perfect match in Ethan Chapin. Their relationship had been one of mutual support and genuine love, and friends described them as a couple who made everyone around them believe in the possibility of true love. Xana's academic achievements and her warm personality had made her beloved by both professors and fellow students. Ethan Chapin, the youngest of the 4 victims at just 20 years old, was remembered as someone with a kind heart and an easy smile. His fraternity brothers described him as loyal and genuine, someone who treated everyone with respect and kindness. His love for Xana was evident to everyone who knew them, and his frequent presence at the King Road house had made him part of the family there. A memorial was held for Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogan, celebrating their lives and the impact they had made on everyone who knew them. The service was filled with stories, laughter through tears, and a determination to honor their memory by living fully and loving deeply. The University of Idaho community also came together to remember the victims. Memorial services, scholarship funds, and campus initiatives were established to ensure that Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan would not be forgotten. Their names were added to campus memorials, and their stories became part of the university's history. The impact of their deaths extended far beyond their immediate circle of family and friends. The case had touched people across the nation who had followed the story and felt a connection to these 4 young people they had never met. Social media was filled with tributes, memories, and expressions of support for the families. The tragedy also sparked important conversations about safety, both on college campuses and in small communities. Universities across the country reviewed their security protocols, students became more aware of their surroundings, and families had difficult but necessary conversations about personal safety. For the surviving roommates, the path forward was particularly challenging. They had lost not just friends but their sense of security and normalcy. The trauma of that night would be something they would carry with them forever, but they also became symbols of resilience and the possibility of healing after unimaginable loss. The King Road house itself became a subject of community debate. Many felt it should be demolished, as it had become too painful a reminder of the tragedy. Others argued for its preservation as a memorial. Ultimately, the decision was made to demolish the structure, with the understanding that the true memorial to the victims would be in the lives they had touched and the love they had shared. As months passed and the seasons changed in Moscow, the community began to find ways to move forward while still honoring the memory of the 4 victims. It was a delicate balance between healing and remembrance, between returning to normal life and never forgetting the tragedy that had changed everything. The families of the victims became advocates not just for justice in their specific case, but for awareness about violence against young people and the importance of community support in times of tragedy. Their strength in the face of unimaginable loss became an inspiration to many who followed their journey. The case also highlighted the power of community in times of crisis. The outpouring of support for the families, the cooperation between law enforcement agencies, and the way the university and town came together showed the best of human nature in response to the worst of human actions. As 2023 progressed and the legal proceedings in the case moved forward, the families of Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan continued their long journey toward whatever healing might be possible after such profound loss. The path to justice in a case of this magnitude is never quick or simple, and they knew that years might pass before the legal process was complete. Brian Koberger's case moved through the Idaho court system with the careful deliberation that capital cases require. His defense team mounted various legal challenges, while prosecutors built their case methodically, knowing that they would need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he was responsible for the murders. The evidence in the case was complex and multifaceted. DNA evidence, cell phone data, vehicle records, and witness statements all played roles in building the prosecution's case. The defense, as is their right and responsibility, challenged this evidence and sought to create reasonable doubt about their client's guilt. For the families, each court appearance and legal filing was a reminder of their loss, but also a step toward potential justice. They attended hearings when possible, issued statements to the media, and worked to ensure that their children's cases remained in the public consciousness. On the 2-year mark of the gruesome crime, parents of the University of Idaho victims spoke out, sharing their ongoing grief but also their determination to see justice served. Their strength and dignity in the face of unimaginable loss continued to inspire those following the case. The University of Idaho also continued its healing process. New security measures were implemented, counseling services were expanded, and programs were created to honor the memory of the 4 victims. The campus community learned to balance the need to move forward with education and campus life while never forgetting what had been lost. The case had a lasting impact on true crime coverage and social media investigation. The intense public interest and amateur sleuthing that had surrounded the case led to discussions about the ethics of online investigation and the balance between public interest and privacy for victims' families. Moscow, Idaho, gradually returned to its rhythms as a college town, but it was forever changed. The innocence that had once characterized the community was gone, replaced by a more cautious awareness of the potential for evil to intrude into even the most peaceful places. The house on King Road was eventually demolished, but not before becoming a pilgrimage site for those touched by the story. People came from across the country to pay their respects, leaving flowers, notes, and tokens of remembrance for 4 young people they had never met but whose story had touched their hearts. In its place, discussions began about what should occupy that space. Some suggested a memorial garden, others a scholarship fund building, still others believed the site should simply return to being a normal part of the neighborhood. Whatever decision was ultimately made, it would need to balance the need for remembrance with the community's desire to heal and move forward. The surviving roommates, whose names were kept private to protect them from unwanted attention, began the long process of rebuilding their lives. They had counseling resources available to them, and the university and community worked to ensure they had the support they needed to continue their education if they chose to do so. As our story draws to a close tonight, with the gentle rain continuing to fall outside your window, we remember that true crime stories are not just about the crimes themselves, but about the lives that were lived, the love that was shared, and the communities that must find ways to heal after tragedy strikes. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernadal, and Ethan Chapin were not just victims of a crime, they were beloved children, loyal friends, dedicated students, and young people full of dreams and potential. Story 4. This particular case takes us to Portland, Oregon, where the persistent autumn rain of 2024 became the backdrop for one of the most puzzling disappearances the Pacific Northwest has seen in recent years. Maya Chun wasn't someone who disappeared easily from people's memories. Those who knew her describe a woman who lit up rooms with her infectious laugh and had an uncanny ability to solve problems that stumped everyone else. Standing 5'4" with straight black hair that she often wore in a practical ponytail, Maya had moved to Portland 3 years earlier from San Francisco, drawn by the city's tech scene and, ironically, its reputation for rain. She used to joke that she was part plant, her roommate, Sarah Martinez, told police during the initial interviews. Maya would open all the windows during rainstorms and just stand there, breathing it in. She said it helped her think. Maya worked for CloudSync Technologies, a mid-sized software company in Portland's Pearl District. Her colleagues knew her as the person who stayed late not because she had to, but because she genuinely loved untangling complex code. She was methodical, careful, the type of person who backed up her files twice and always carried an umbrella, even when the forecast called for clear skies. But Maya wasn't all work. She was an avid hiker who explored Oregon's trails every weekend the weather permitted. She volunteered at the local animal shelter on Sunday mornings and had been slowly learning to speak Portuguese so she could visit Brazil, a trip she'd been planning for over a year. Her apartment in the Hawthorne district was filled with plants, photography books, and a collection of vintage rain jackets she'd been accumulating since moving to Portland. Her routine was remarkably consistent. Maya woke up at 6:30 a.m. every weekday, made coffee in her French press while listening to NPR, and caught the 7:45 a.m. bus to downtown. She usually worked until 6 p.m., sometimes later, then stopped by the small market near her apartment to pick up ingredients for dinner. Evenings were for cooking, reading, or video calling her parents in California. This routine had been Maya's anchor for 3 years. Which is why what happened on October 15, 2024, was so completely out of character. October 15, 2024, started like any other Tuesday in Portland. The morning was crisp, with low clouds promising rain by afternoon. Maya arrived at CloudSync at her usual time, coffee in hand, already mentally organizing her day. She had a project deadline approaching, a security update for a client's database system that required meticulous attention to detail. Her coworkers remember Maya seeming perfectly normal that day. She participated in the 10 a.m. stand-up meeting, discussed weekend hiking plans with her teammate David, and even shared a funny video of a cat learning to use an iPad. Maya ate lunch at her desk while reviewing code, something she did when she was particularly focused on a project. Around 3 p.m., the predicted rain began. Light at first, then steadily increasing to the kind of persistent drizzle that makes Portland famous. Maya sent a text to Sarah around 3:30 p.m., rain starting. Might stay late to finish this security patch. Don't wait up for dinner. This was typical Maya behavior. She often worked late when deadlines loomed, and she always let Sarah know. What wasn't typical was what happened next. At 4:17 p.m., according to her computer's logs, Maya suddenly closed all her applications and shut down her workstation. Security cameras show her gathering her things quickly, her backpack, rain jacket, and the small succulent plant she kept on her desk. She spoke briefly with her supervisor, Tom Wright, who later told investigators she said she wasn't feeling well and needed to leave early. She did look a bit pale, Tom recalled. But Maya wasn't the type to fake illness. If she said she wasn't feeling well, she wasn't feeling well. Maya left the building at 4:22 p.m., 5 minutes after shutting down her computer. The security camera at the building's entrance shows her stepping out into the rain, pulling up her hood, and turning left onto Northwest 13th Avenue. She was carrying her usual backpack and had her phone in her hand. This is where the timeline becomes crucial, and where the mystery deepens. At 4:35 p.m., Maya's phone sent an automatic location update to her iPhone's location services. She was at the corner of Northwest 13th and Lovejoy, about 3 blocks from her office. This location made sense, it was directly on her route to the bus stop she normally used. At 4:47 p.m., another automatic location ping. Maya was now at Jamieson Square Park, in the heart of the Pearl District. This was unusual. The park wasn't on her normal route home, and Maya wasn't someone who took detours, especially not in the rain. At 5:03 p.m., the final location ping. Maya's phone was now at Northwest 11th and Marshall, near the Whole Foods Market. Again, this wasn't on her usual route, but it wasn't completely out of the ordinary either. Maya sometimes stopped at this Whole Foods for specialty items. Then, nothing. No more location updates, no phone calls, no text messages. Maya Chen had simply vanished into the Portland rain. Sarah Martinez first noticed something was wrong around 8 p.m. that Tuesday. Maya's text had said she might work late, but she usually checked in if she was going to be out past 7 p.m. Sarah tried calling, but the phone went straight to voicemail. She tried texting, but the messages showed as delivered but not read. By 9 p.m., Sarah was genuinely worried. Maya was nothing if not reliable. She called Tom Wright, Maya's supervisor, who confirmed that Maya had left the office feeling unwell around 4:30 p.m. Tom assumed Maya had gone straight home to rest. Sarah drove to Maya's usual bus stops, then to the places Maya might go, the small market near their apartment, the coffee shop where Maya sometimes worked on weekends, even the 24-hour drugstore in case Maya had needed medication. Nothing. No one had seen her. At 10:30 p.m., Sarah called the Portland Police Bureau to report Maya missing. The responding officer, Detective Jennifer Walsh, would later become intimately familiar with every detail of Maya's life and disappearance. In missing person cases, the first 48 hours are critical, Detective Walsh explains. But Maya's case was unusual from the start. She wasn't the type to just disappear. Her life was ordered, predictable. When someone like that vanishes, you know something significant has happened. The initial search focused on Maya's known locations and routes. Police checked with bus drivers, reviewed security footage from nearby businesses, and canvassed the area around her office and apartment. Maya's phone had gone dark at 5:03 p.m., but the phone company confirmed it hadn't been turned off, it had simply stopped connecting to cell towers. Wednesday morning brought expanded search efforts. Maya's parents, Linda and Robert Chen, drove up from San Francisco overnight. The Portland Mountain Rescue Team was called in to search the parks and wooded areas Maya was known to frequent. Volunteers from Maya's workplace and her hiking groups combed the neighborhoods between her office and apartment. The rain continued throughout Wednesday, washing away any physical evidence that might have been left outdoors. But it also revealed something important. Maya's car was still parked in the covered garage beneath her apartment building, exactly where she always left it. Whatever had happened to Maya, she hadn't driven anywhere. Detective Walsh reviewed Maya's financial records. No unusual transactions. Her debit card hadn't been used since Monday evening when she'd bought groceries. Her credit cards were inactive. Her bank account remained untouched. Maya's phone records showed nothing suspicious in the days leading up to her disappearance. Her texts were routine, work discussions, plans with friends, messages to her parents. Her internet browsing history revealed nothing unusual, work-related searches, hiking trail conditions, and a few sites related to her planned Brazil trip. By Thursday, the search had expanded citywide. Maya's photo was released to local media. Tips began coming in, but none led anywhere concrete. Someone thought they'd seen a woman matching Maya's description at a bus stop in southeast Portland, but the timing didn't match. Another caller reported seeing someone who looked like Maya getting into a car downtown, but the witness's description was too vague to be helpful. The most promising lead came from a Whole Foods employee who thought she remembered Maya coming in around 5 p.m. on Tuesday. But when investigators reviewed the store's security footage, there was no sign of Maya. The employee later admitted she might have been thinking of a different day. As the days passed, the mystery only deepened. Maya hadn't used her phone, her cards, or any of her accounts. She hadn't contacted anyone. She had simply walked into the Portland rain and disappeared. In modern missing person cases, investigators have tools that previous generations of detectives could only dream of. Digital footprints, cell phone data, credit card transactions, security cameras, all create a web of information that usually makes it nearly impossible for someone to simply vanish. But Maya's case was proving that even in our connected world, people can still disappear without a trace. The Portland Police Bureau's digital forensics team, led by Detective Marcus Thompson, began a thorough analysis of Maya's electronic life. They had her laptop from work, her personal laptop from home, her iPad, and various smart devices. What they found painted a picture of someone whose digital life was as organized and predictable as her physical one. Maya's work laptop showed a typical day of software development. She'd been working on the security patch she'd mentioned to Sarah, making steady progress throughout the morning and early afternoon. Her last saved file was timestamped 4:16 p.m., just 1 minute before she closed all her applications. The timing was interesting, Detective Thompson noted. She saved her work, closed everything properly, then shut down. This wasn't someone who left in a panic. It was methodical, like everything else Maya did. Maya's personal devices revealed a woman preparing for the future, not someone planning to disappear. Her browser history from the weekend before showed her researching Portuguese language apps, looking up Brazil travel guides, and browsing hiking equipment for a trip she'd planned to Mount Hood the following weekend. Her email showed nothing unusual. Work communications, personal messages from friends and family, newsletters from outdoor gear companies, and receipts from online purchases. The most recent email was from her mother, sent Monday evening, asking about Maya's plans for Thanksgiving. Maya had responded Tuesday morning with her usual detail, including travel dates and dinner preferences. Social media analysis revealed more of the same. Maya wasn't a heavy social media user, but she maintained accounts on Instagram and Facebook, primarily to share hiking photos and stay in touch with college friends. Her last post was a photo of her breakfast on Tuesday morning, avocado toast and coffee, with the caption, "Fuel for Tackling Code." It was liked by 12 friends and colleagues, a typical response for Maya's posts. The cell phone data proved more puzzling. Maya's iPhone had connected to cell towers consistently throughout Tuesday, creating a clear path of her movements. But after that final ping at 5:03 p.m. near the Whole Foods, the phone had simply gone silent. Not turned off, not destroyed, just silent. Cell phones don't just stop working, Detective Thompson explained to Maya's parents during a briefing. They have to be either powered down, damaged, or taken somewhere with no signal. Portland has excellent cell coverage, so dead zones are rare and well known. The investigation expanded to include surveillance footage from every business along Maya's route. Hours of video were reviewed, frame by frame. Maya appeared on several cameras, walking normally, not appearing distressed or hurried. But after 5 p.m., there was no trace of her on any camera. The most frustrating aspect was the gap between Maya's last known location and her disappearance. The Whole Foods at 11th and Marshall had extensive security cameras, covering the parking lot and all entrances. Maya never appeared on any of them. Yet her phone had registered her presence in that area at 5:03 p.m. Either the phone location was wrong, which is rare with modern GPS, or Maya was nearby but never entered the store, Detective Walsh concluded. The question became, where exactly was she, and what happened in those crucial minutes? Bank records and credit monitoring continued to show no activity. Maya's student loan payment was automatically deducted on schedule. Her phone bill was paid. Her rent was automatically transferred. Her life continued digitally while she remained physically absent. The investigation team ran Maya's information through every available database. Missing persons networks, hospital records, Jane Doe reports from across the Pacific Northwest. Nothing matched. Maya Chen had effectively vanished from all official records the moment her phone went silent. Portland's tight-knit communities rallied around Maya's disappearance with an intensity that both comforted and amazed her family. Within a week of her vanishing, "Find Maya Chen" became a hashtag trending locally on social media. Her photo appeared on telephone poles, in coffee shop windows, and on community bulletin boards throughout the city. The tech community, where Maya had found her professional home, organized with the efficiency of a software deployment. CloudSync Technologies created a dedicated website for Maya's case, complete with timeline, photos, and a tip submission form. Her colleagues took turns maintaining a 24-hour phone line for anyone with information. "Maya was one of us," her coworker David Chen explained, "no relation, despite the shared surname. She was the person who always helped when you were stuck on a problem. When she went missing, we all felt like we'd lost a sister." The hiking community mobilized search teams that covered hundreds of miles of trails in the weeks following Maya's disappearance. They checked every trail Maya had ever posted about on social media, plus dozens more. They looked for her distinctive red backpack, her favorite hiking boots, any sign that she might have decided to go for an unplanned hike. Forest Grove, a small community where Maya volunteered at the animal shelter, organized a candlelight vigil on the one-month anniversary of her disappearance. More than 200 people attended, including many who had never met Maya but had been touched by her story. "She had this way of making everyone feel heard," said Jennifer Martinez, a fellow volunteer at the shelter. "Maya would sit with the most anxious dogs, the ones nobody else could handle, and somehow calm them down. She had this patience, this gentleness. Dogs could sense it immediately." The vigil provided emotional support for Maya's family and friends, but it also served a practical purpose. Detective Walsh used the gathering to appeal directly to the community for any information, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. "Someone out there knows something," Detective Walsh told the assembled crowd. "Maybe you saw Maya that Tuesday evening. Maybe you noticed something unusual in your neighborhood. Maybe you saw a car or a person who didn't belong." In cases like this, the smallest detail can break everything open. Tips continued to come in, each one investigated thoroughly. A woman in southeast Portland reported seeing someone who looked like Maya getting off a bus near Mount Tabor Park. Investigation revealed it was a different person entirely. A man called to report finding a red backpack in Forest Park, but it belonged to a hiker who had lost it months earlier. The most promising tip came 3 weeks after Maya's disappearance. A couple walking their dog in Laurelhurst Park reported finding a smartphone wedged under a bench. The phone was water damaged and wouldn't power on, but it appeared to be an iPhone similar to Maya's. Detective Walsh personally rushed the phone to the forensics lab. The investigation team held their breath while technicians attempted to retrieve data from the water-damaged device. After hours of careful work, they managed to power it on long enough to check the serial number. It wasn't Maya's phone. Each dead end was devastating, Maya's mother Linda recalled. "We'd get our hopes up, thinking this might be the breakthrough, and then, nothing. But we kept pushing forward because we knew Maya was out there somewhere, and she needed us to keep looking." Social media became both a blessing and a curse. The hashtag #FindMaya hashtag helped spread awareness, but it also attracted conspiracy theorists and false leads. Amateur investigators pored over every photo and detail, sometimes generating more confusion than clarity. One particularly persistent theory suggested that Maya had voluntarily disappeared to escape some unknown threat. This theory gained traction when amateur sleuths discovered that Maya had recently increased her life insurance policy through her employer's benefits enrollment period. Detective Walsh addressed this theory directly. Maya increased her life insurance by $25,000, which is standard when someone gets a promotion and pay raise, as Maya had 6 months earlier. "There's nothing suspicious about this. All evidence points to Maya being happy with her life and looking forward to the future." 6 weeks into the investigation, Detective Walsh received a call that would refocus the entire search effort. A maintenance worker at Portland International Airport had found a small succulent plant in a trash can near the departure gates. The plant was in a small ceramic pot with a chip in the rim, identical to the one Maya had taken from her desk the day she disappeared. Plants don't typically end up in airport trash cans by accident, Detective Walsh noted. Someone had to carry that plant to the airport and dispose of it there. The discovery prompted a complete review of airport security footage for October 15 and the days following. Hours of video were analyzed, looking for any sign of Maya or anyone carrying her distinctive plant. The search expanded to include all flights departing Portland in the 48 hours after Maya's disappearance. Airport records showed no ticket purchases under Maya's name or using her credit cards. But the plant's discovery raised troubling questions. Had Maya been at the airport? Had someone else brought her belongings there? Was this evidence of foul play or simply a coincidence? The plant finding changed everything, Detective Thompson explained. It was the first physical evidence we had that Maya might have been somewhere other than her usual neighborhood routes. The investigation team began exploring the possibility that Maya had left Portland, either voluntarily or involuntarily. They checked bus terminals, train stations, and ride-sharing services. They expanded their search to include other cities, other states. Maya's financial records were scrutinized more closely. Investigators looked for any large cash withdrawals that might have funded travel or indicated advance planning. They found nothing unusual. Maya's spending patterns remained consistent right up until her disappearance. The Portland Police Bureau reached out to law enforcement agencies across the Pacific Northwest, sharing Maya's information and asking them to check local missing person reports and Jane Doe cases. The FBI was consulted, given the possibility that Maya might have crossed state lines. A new theory began to emerge: Maya might have been the victim of a random crime. Portland had experienced a slight uptick in street crimes in 2024, and investigators began looking at any unsolved assaults, robberies, or abductions in the weeks before and after Maya's disappearance. This line of investigation led to a breakthrough of sorts. Police discovered that on October 13, just 2 days before Maya vanished, a woman had been attacked while walking alone in the Pearl District, only 6 blocks from where Maya was last seen. The woman had fought off her attacker and escaped, but the perpetrator was never caught. The timing and location were too coincidental to ignore, Detective Walsh said. We had to consider the possibility that Maya encountered the same individual, but with a different outcome. The attack victim worked with a police sketch artist to create a composite drawing of her assailant. The image was circulated to local media and posted on the Find Maya website. Tips began coming in, but none led to definitive identification of the suspect. Forensic analysis of the scene where Maya's phone last pinged revealed something interesting. The area around 11th and Marshall had several large storm drains, part of Portland's extensive stormwater management system. Heavy rains on October 15 had caused significant runoff, and investigators began to wonder if evidence might have been washed into the drainage system. A specialized team was brought in to search the storm drains and sewers in the area. They found nothing related to Maya's case, but the search highlighted the challenges of investigating a disappearance that occurred during a significant weather event. The rain that had provided Maya with such comfort throughout her life had become an obstacle in finding her. It had washed away potential evidence, limited visibility for witnesses, and created perfect conditions for someone to disappear without a trace. 3 months after Maya's disappearance, Detective Walsh found herself surrounded by evidence that led nowhere and theories that couldn't be proven. The investigation had consumed hundreds of hours, involved dozens of officers, and followed every conceivable lead. Yet Maya Chen remained missing, as if she had simply evaporated into the Portland rain. The prevailing theories fell into 3 categories, each with its own compelling evidence and frustrating gaps. Theory 1. Random crime. The attack on another woman 2 days before Maya's disappearance suggested a predator operating in the Pearl District. Maya's route home would have taken her through several poorly lit areas where an assault could have occurred unobserved. The discovery of her plant at the airport could indicate that her attacker had disposed of evidence there, possibly while fleeing the city. But this theory had problems. Maya was cautious and aware of her surroundings. Her co-workers described her as someone who always locked her car doors and checked behind her when walking alone. She carried pepper spray and had taken a self-defense class the previous year. It seemed unlikely that she would have been caught completely off guard. Theory 2, voluntary disappearance. Some investigators wondered if Maya had chosen to disappear, perhaps to escape some unknown pressure or threat. The methodical way she had shut down her computer and the fact that she had taken her personal plant suggested possible advanced planning. This theory also faced significant challenges. Maya had no history of mental illness or erratic behavior. Her relationships with family and friends were strong. She had been looking forward to her Brazil trip and had made plans for the following weekend. Most importantly, Maya was financially responsible. She would never have abandoned her obligations without making arrangements. Theory 3, accidental death. Portland's extensive network of storm drains, construction sites, and waterways created numerous opportunities for accidents, especially during heavy rain. Maya might have fallen, been swept away by floodwater, or suffered some other mishap that had prevented her from seeking help. The problem with this theory was the lack of any evidence. Maya's body hadn't been found despite extensive searches of waterways and hazardous areas. Her phone's final location was in a busy commercial area, not near any obvious hazards. Detective Walsh had seen missing person cases go cold before, but Maya's case felt different. The evidence was too clean, too absent. In most cases, people leave traces, witnesses, financial transactions, digital breadcrumbs. Maya had left nothing. It's almost like she was too careful, Detective Walsh reflected. Maya was the type of person who planned everything, who left detailed notes, who never went anywhere without telling someone. The fact that she vanished so completely suggests either incredible bad luck or someone who knew exactly how to make her disappear. The psychological toll on Maya's family and friends was immense. Linda and Robert Chen had temporarily relocated to Portland to be closer to the investigation. They spent their days calling hospitals, visiting homeless shelters, and putting up fresh missing person flyers when the rain had damaged the old ones. Sarah Martinez had moved out of the apartment she'd shared with Maya, unable to cope with the daily reminders of her missing roommate. Maya's bedroom had been preserved exactly as she'd left it, down to the book on her nightstand and the clothes laid out for the weekend hike she never took. The tech community's initial enthusiasm for organizing searches had given way to a more subdued, long-term commitment. CloudSync Technologies had offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to Maya's safe return, but months had passed without any credible claims. "The hardest part is not knowing," said David Chen, Maya's co-worker. "If something terrible happened to her, at least we could grieve properly. But this limbo, this not knowing whether she's alive or dead, whether she's suffering or at peace, it's torture." As winter gave way to spring in Portland, Maya's case remained active, though the daily urgency had evolved into a methodical, long-term investigation. Detective Walsh had seen many missing person cases transition from emergency searches to cold case files, but she was determined not to let Maya's disappearance become just another statistic. New technology brought new possibilities. The Portland Police Bureau had invested in advanced cell phone analysis software that could more precisely triangulate Maya's final known location. The new analysis placed Maya's phone within a 50-meter radius of a small parking lot behind a row of shops on Northwest Marshall Street. This parking lot had been searched multiple times, but the refined location data prompted another, more intensive examination. Investigators brought in ground-penetrating radar to check for any subsurface disturbances. They found nothing related to Maya's case, but the search did uncover some old utility lines that weren't on current city maps. The FBI's involvement had brought additional resources to the investigation. Agent Sarah Kim specialized in missing person cases that crossed state lines, and she brought a fresh perspective to Maya's disappearance. In cases like this, where all the normal indicators point to a stable, happy person, we have to look at less obvious possibilities, Agent Kim explained. Sometimes people have secrets they've kept from everyone. Sometimes they're running from something they never told their closest friends about. Agent Kim's team conducted deeper background checks on Maya, going back to her childhood and college years. They interviewed roommates from San Francisco, professors from her graduate program, and former colleagues. The picture that emerged was remarkably consistent. Maya was exactly who she appeared to be. We found no hidden debts, no secret relationships, no past trauma that might have motivated her to disappear, Agent Kim reported. Maya Chen was genuinely what she seemed, a stable, intelligent woman with strong family ties and a bright future. The investigation did uncover one previously unknown detail about Maya's final day. A review of her work computer's internet browsing history showed that at 3:45 p.m., just 30 minutes before she left work, Maya had searched for Portland emergency rooms and urgent care clinics near Pearl District. This discovery prompted new questions. Had Maya been more seriously ill than she'd let on to her supervisor? Had she left work seeking medical attention? Investigators contacted every hospital and urgent care facility in Portland, but none had any record of treating Maya that day. The search history raised another possibility: Maya might have been seeking medical help for someone else. But there was no evidence that she had been in contact with anyone who needed medical attention. As the one-year anniversary of Maya's disappearance approached, Detective Walsh made a decision that would either breathe new life into the case or close it forever. She requested that Maya's case be featured on a national true crime television program. "We've exhausted our local resources," Detective Walsh explained to Maya's parents. "We need national exposure, a fresh set of eyes, and access to the show's resources." The decision was difficult for Linda and Robert Chen. Appearing on television meant sharing their grief with the entire country, but it also meant reaching millions of potential witnesses who might have information about their daughter. The television episode aired on a rainy Tuesday evening in October 2025, exactly 1 year after Maya had vanished. The show featured interviews with Maya's family, friends, and investigators. It included a timeline of her disappearance and emphasized the unusual aspects of the case. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The show's tip line received over 500 calls in the first 24 hours. Most were expressions of sympathy or obviously false leads, but several required serious investigation. The most promising tip came from a truck driver who had been making deliveries in Portland on October 15, 2024. He reported seeing a woman matching Maya's description talking to someone in a dark sedan near the Whole Foods where Maya's phone had last been detected. The driver hadn't thought much of it at the time, but seeing Maya's photo on television had triggered his memory. "She seemed to know the person in the car," the driver told investigators. "It looked like a normal conversation, not like she was in distress or anything. But after a few minutes, she got in the car and they drove away." This tip represented the first potential witness to Maya's final moments. Investigators worked with the truck driver to narrow down the timing and location. Security cameras from nearby businesses were re-examined with this new timeframe in mind. As I finish telling you Maya's story tonight, the rain continues to fall outside, just as it was falling on that October evening when she disappeared. It's been over a year now since Maya Chen walked out of her office building and vanished into the Portland rain, and her case remains one of the most puzzling disappearances in recent Pacific Northwest history. The investigation continues, though it has settled into the long, patient rhythm of a cold case. Detective Walsh still receives occasional tips, still follows up on every lead, no matter how unlikely. Maya's family has returned to California, but they visit Portland regularly, maintaining hope that one day they'll have answers. The Find Maya website remains active, updated monthly with any new developments. Her co-workers at CloudSync have established a scholarship in her name for young women entering computer science programs. The hiking groups she belonged to have dedicated a trail marker to her memory in Forest Park, where she spent so many peaceful weekends. Maya's case has become part of Portland's urban folklore, a reminder that even in our connected, surveilled world, people can still vanish without explanation. It's a story that haunts anyone who knew her and puzzles anyone who hears it. What happened to Maya Chen on that rainy Tuesday evening? Was she the victim of random crime, or did someone specifically target her? Did she encounter someone she knew, someone she trusted enough to get into their car? Did she suffer an accident in those final, unwitnessed moments, or is she somehow, somewhere, still alive? The questions remain unanswered, floating like the persistent Oregon rain that has become so symbolic of her disappearance. But the search continues, fueled by love, hope, and the belief that someday, somehow, Maya will come home. As you drift off to sleep tonight, listening to the rain that Maya loved so much, remember that there are people still looking for her, still hoping, still believing that every storm brings the possibility of answers washing up with the tide. Story 5. This story takes us to Cedar Ridge, Texas, population 3,847, nestled in the rolling hills about an hour southeast of Austin. It's the kind of place where the local diner still serves coffee for $1, where the high school graduation is the biggest event of the year, and where a mystery like the one I'm about to tell you simply wasn't supposed to happen. The strange disappearance of James "Jimmy" Caldwell, a 34-year-old veterinarian whose vanishing on a humid August night in 2024 has left an entire community questioning everything they thought they knew about their peaceful little town. Cedar Ridge sits like a postcard from a simpler time, where the biggest building is the grain elevator that's been standing since 1952, and where the newest business is a Dollar General that opened 5 years ago to much local debate. Main Street runs exactly 6 blocks, flanked by buildings that house Miller's Hardware, Betty's Cut and Curl, the Cedar Ridge Cafe, and the post office where Martha Webb has sorted mail for 23 years. Dr. James Caldwell had been part of this fabric for nearly a decade. He'd arrived in Cedar Ridge in 2015, fresh out of veterinary school at Texas A&M, drawn not by high-paying opportunities but by something harder to define, the appeal of a place where your work mattered, where you knew every dog by name and every farmer by their troubles. Jimmy, as everyone called him, had grown up in Houston, but you'd never know it from watching him work. He had a way with animals that seemed almost mystical to the local farmers. Cattle that refused to cooperate for other vets would stand calmly for Jimmy. Horses with behavioral problems would gentle under his touch. Even the meanest barn cats would purr when he examined them. Jimmy had what my grandfather used to call the gift, said Eleanor Martinez, whose family ranch had relied on Jimmy's services for years. Some people are just born understanding animals. Jimmy was one of those people. The Cedar Ridge Veterinary Clinic occupied a converted house on Elm Street, painted white with green shutters, surrounded by old oak trees that provided blessed shade during the brutal Texas summers. Jimmy lived in the apartment above the clinic, a practical arrangement that meant he was always available for emergencies, and in rural Texas, animal emergencies didn't follow business hours. Jimmy's routine was as predictable as the sunrise. He arrived downstairs at his clinic every morning at 7 a.m. sharp, coffee in hand, usually wearing jeans and boots that had seen better days but were broken in just right for a day of large animal work. He'd spend the morning on scheduled appointments, vaccinations, wellness checks, the occasional surgery. Afternoons were often dedicated to farm calls, driving his white pickup truck to ranches scattered across 3 counties. But Jimmy wasn't all work. He played guitar at the monthly community center gatherings, volunteered at the annual livestock show, and had been quietly dating Sarah Chen, the town's only pharmacist, for about 2 years. Sarah had moved to Cedar Ridge from Dallas, drawn by the slower pace and lower cost of living, and she and Jimmy had bonded over being transplants trying to build lives in small-town Texas. Jimmy was the steadiest person I ever knew, Sarah would later tell investigators. He was never late, never forgot an appointment, never broke a promise. If Jimmy said he'd be somewhere at a certain time, he was there 5 minutes early. This reliability made what happened on August 15, 2024, so completely baffling. On that particular day, August 15, 2024, dawned hot and humid, typical for East Texas in the middle of summer. The temperature was already 78 degrees at sunrise, with the promise of reaching 102 by afternoon. Jimmy arrived at his clinic right on schedule, unlocking the front door and switching on the lights that illuminated the small waiting room with its mismatched chairs and walls covered in photos of grateful pets. His first appointment was at 8 a.m., routine vaccinations for the Patterson family's 3 dogs. Mrs. Patterson later remembered Jimmy seeming perfectly normal, chatting about the weather and asking about her grandson's Little League season. He'd scheduled a light morning, knowing he had a big farm call that afternoon at the Riverside Ranch, where he needed to pregnancy check about 40 head of cattle. Around 10 a.m., Jimmy received a phone call that his receptionist, Maria Santos, would later describe to police as unusual. Maria had worked for Jimmy for 4 years and knew his patterns well. Most calls to the clinic were either scheduled appointments or farm emergency calls, straightforward, professional conversations. This call was different. Maria could only hear Jimmy's side of the conversation, but what she heard puzzled her. He kept saying, "Are you sure, and when did this happen?" Maria recalled. Then he got very quiet and just listened for a long time. At the end, he said, "I'll take care of it," in this serious voice I'd never heard him use before. After the call, Jimmy seemed distracted. He completed his morning appointments competently. Jimmy was too professional to let personal matters interfere with animal care, but Maria noticed he kept checking his phone and seemed to be thinking about something else. At noon, Jimmy told Maria he was going to grab lunch at the Cedar Ridge Cafe before heading out to Riverside Ranch. This was normal. Jimmy often ate at the cafe, where Betty Morrison served the kind of home cooking that reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen back in Houston. Betty Morrison had been running the Cedar Ridge Cafe for 15 years, and she prided herself on knowing every customer's usual order. Jimmy always got the chicken fried steak with mashed potatoes and green beans, sweet tea, and a slice of buttermilk pie if she'd made it fresh that morning. But on August 15th, Jimmy broke pattern. He ordered just a cup of coffee and sat in the corner booth, constantly checking his phone. Betty later told investigators that Jimmy seemed worried about something and kept looking out the window toward Main Street. "I asked him if everything was all right," Betty remembered. "He just said he had a lot on his mind and apologized for being distracted." Jimmy was always polite, even when something was bothering him. Jimmy left the cafe around 12:45 p.m., telling Betty he'd see her tomorrow, a promise he wouldn't keep. He walked the 2 blocks back to his clinic, where Maria saw him gathering supplies for the afternoon farm call. Large animal pregnancy checks required specific equipment: ultrasound machine, gloves, lubricant, and pregnancy test strips. At 1:15 p.m., Jimmy loaded his truck with the afternoon supplies and told Maria he'd be back around 5 p.m. Riverside Ranch was about 20 minutes away, and 40 pregnancy checks usually took about 3 hours, including paperwork and consultation with the ranch manager. "Drive safe," Maria called out as Jimmy climbed into his truck. It was something she always said, a small ritual of workplace friendship. Jimmy waved and smiled, looking like himself again for just a moment. It was the last time anyone in Cedar Ridge saw Dr. James Caldwell. Riverside Ranch sprawled across 2,400 acres of rolling pastureland and wooded creek bottoms, owned by the Hartley family for 3 generations. Ranch manager Tom Hartley had worked with Jimmy on dozens of cattle calls over the years and considered the young vet not just a professional contact but a friend. Tom was waiting in the main barn at 1:30 p.m. when Jimmy was supposed to arrive. By 1:45, he started checking the ranch road for Jimmy's familiar white pickup. By 2 p.m., Tom was getting concerned. Jimmy was never late, especially not for big jobs like pregnancy checking an entire herd. Tom called Jimmy's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. "Hey Jimmy, it's Tom at Riverside. Just checking to see if you're running late or having truck trouble. Give me a call when you get this." By 2:30 p.m., Tom called the veterinary clinic. Maria Santos answered, sounding increasingly worried herself. "He left here right on time," Maria told Tom. "Said he'd be there by 1:30. I've been trying to call him too, but his phone goes straight to voicemail." Tom decided to drive the route Jimmy would have taken from town to the ranch. Farm Road 1847 was a two-lane blacktop that wound through pine forests and open pastures, with few houses and even fewer businesses. It was the kind of road where a breakdown or accident could leave someone stranded for hours. About halfway between Cedar Ridge and Riverside Ranch, Tom found Jimmy's truck. The white Ford F-250 was pulled off on the shoulder, parked neatly as if Jimmy had simply stopped to make a phone call. The engine was off, keys still in the ignition. Jimmy's veterinary supplies were still loaded in the back, untouched. His coffee cup sat in the center console, still half full. But Jimmy was nowhere to be found. Tom called 911 immediately. Cedar Ridge had its own police department, but it consisted of just 3 officers and a chief, so the Caldwell County Sheriff's Department took the lead on the investigation. Deputy Sheriff Lisa Rodriguez arrived at the scene within 20 minutes, followed shortly by Sheriff Mike Thompson himself. In 20 years of law enforcement, I've seen a lot of strange things, Sheriff Thompson would later reflect. But finding an abandoned vehicle with no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play, and no logical explanation for why someone would just walk away, that stays with you. The initial scene investigation revealed few clues. Jimmy's truck showed no signs of mechanical problems. The doors were unlocked, which wasn't unusual in rural Texas where many people still didn't lock their vehicles. His wallet was in the glove compartment, containing $247 in cash and all his credit cards. His cell phone was missing. Most puzzling was the location itself. The truck was parked along a straight stretch of road with clear visibility in both directions. There were no intersecting roads nearby, no buildings, no reason for Jimmy to have stopped there unless he'd experienced a mechanical problem or received an urgent phone call. A search of the immediate area found no trace of Jimmy. The roadside ditches were empty except for the usual rural debris, beer cans, fast food wrappers, and the occasional hubcap. The fence line separated the road from a pasture where cattle grazed peacefully, showing no signs of disturbance. As news of Jimmy's disappearance spread through Cedar Ridge, volunteers began arriving at the scene. By evening, more than 50 people had joined the search, including farmers with tractors and all-terrain vehicles, members of the volunteer fire department, and neighbors who had simply closed their businesses early to help look for the missing veterinarian. Jimmy had helped every one of us at some point, said hardware store owner Bill Miller. When your animals are in trouble and you call the vet, it doesn't matter if it's Christmas morning or the middle of a thunderstorm, Jimmy would come. We owed it to him to look for him with the same dedication. The search continued until well after dark, using flashlights and vehicle headlights to scan the ditches, creek beds, and wooded areas near where Jimmy's truck had been found. They found nothing. The next morning brought Texas Department of Public Safety investigators to Cedar Ridge, along with a K-9 unit from Austin. The German Shepherd named Rex was trained in tracking missing persons, and his handler, Officer Patricia Vega, had successfully located dozens of lost hikers, runaway children, and Alzheimer's patients over her 10-year career. Rex immediately picked up Jimmy's scent from items taken from his apartment above the clinic. The dog led investigators from Jimmy's truck along the roadside for about 50 yards, then stopped at a gate leading into the pasture. The trail went cold there, as if Jimmy had simply vanished into thin air. Dogs don't lie, Officer Vega explained to the assembled searchers. Rex tracked Jimmy's scent to that gate, then lost it completely. Either Jimmy got into a vehicle at that point, or something happened that eliminated his scent trail. The investigation expanded to include Jimmy's personal life, something that made the tight-knit community of Cedar Ridge uncomfortable. Sheriff Thompson knew that most missing person cases involved domestic disputes, financial problems, or other personal issues, but probing into Jimmy's private affairs felt like a violation of the trust the community had placed in their beloved veterinarian. Financial records revealed nothing suspicious. Jimmy had a modest savings account, no unusual debts, and no large transactions in the weeks before his disappearance. His student loans from veterinary school were current, his business was profitable, and he had no gambling debts or other financial pressures that might motivate someone to disappear voluntarily. Interviews with friends and colleagues painted a picture of a content, stable man with no apparent reason to abandon his life. Jimmy loved his work, was committed to his relationship with Sarah Chen, and had been making plans for the future. He'd recently talked about expanding his practice and had put a deposit down on a small ranch he hoped to buy the following year. The idea that Jimmy would just walk away from his life is ridiculous, Sarah told investigators through tears. We'd been talking about getting engaged. He'd shown me the ring he wanted to buy. Jimmy was building a life here, not running from one. The mysterious phone call Jimmy had received that morning became a focus of the investigation. Phone records showed the call had come from a prepaid cell phone that had been purchased with cash at a Walmart in Austin 3 days earlier. The phone had made only one call, to Jimmy's clinic, and had gone silent immediately afterward. Burner phones are almost always bad news in missing person cases, explained DPS investigator Carol Martinez, who had been called in specifically because of her experience with complex disappearances. Someone wanted to contact Jimmy without being traced. The question is whether Jimmy knew the caller or if this was something more sinister. The investigation team attempted to track the prepaid phone's movements using cell tower data, but the phone had apparently been turned off immediately after the call to Jimmy's clinic. Walmart security cameras from 3 days earlier were reviewed, but the person who purchased the phone had paid cash and kept their face turned away from the cameras, clearly someone who knew how to avoid identification. Meanwhile, the search for Jimmy continued. Volunteer teams combed through hundreds of acres of countryside, checking old wells, abandoned buildings, and creek beds. Helicopter searches covered thousands more acres, looking for any sign of clothing, disturbance, or worse. Local farmers granted permission for searchers to examine their property, and many joined the effort themselves. The Texas Rangers were called in after the first week, bringing additional resources and expertise to what was becoming one of the most puzzling missing person cases in the region's recent history. Ranger Captain David Stone had worked similar cases across the state, but he admitted that Jimmy's disappearance had unusual elements. Most people who disappear voluntarily leave some kind of trail: credit card use, phone calls, sightings by witnesses, Captain Stone explained. People who disappear involuntarily usually leave evidence of struggle or foul play. Jimmy's case has neither. It's like he simply ceased to exist at that gate on Farm Road 1847. As the investigation stretched into its second week, certain uncomfortable truths about Cedar Ridge began to surface. Small towns have a way of keeping secrets, and Jimmy's disappearance had stirred up sentiment that had been settled for years. The first revelation came from an unexpected source: Jimmy's banking records, which investigators had examined more thoroughly. While Jimmy's personal finances were clean, his business accounts showed some irregularities that hadn't been immediately apparent. Over the past year, Jimmy had been receiving payments from a company called Hill Country Consulting, payments that weren't connected to any veterinary services he provided. Hill Country Consulting turned out to be a shell company with an address that led to a mailbox service in Austin. The payments to Jimmy totaled nearly $30,000 over 12 months, always in round numbers, $2,500 exactly, deposited on the 15th of each month. That's not how veterinary services are typically billed, noted forensic accountant Jennifer Walsh, who had been brought in to analyze Jimmy's financial records. Vet bills are usually odd amounts: $127.50 for a vaccination, $85.75 for an office visit. These payments look more like a salary or retainer. The discovery prompted investigators to dig deeper into Jimmy's activities during the year before his disappearance. What they found was a pattern of trips that didn't match his known schedule. According to his appointment book and Maria's records, Jimmy should have been at his clinic or on local farm calls. But his truck's GPS system told a different story. Jimmy had been making regular trips to Austin, Houston, and even Dallas, trips that lasted overnight and weren't reflected in his official schedule. He'd been careful about it, always arranging coverage for emergencies and never missing scheduled appointments, but the pattern was clear: Jimmy had been living a double life. Sarah Chen was devastated by this revelation. "I thought I knew Jimmy completely," she told investigators. "We talked every night. We spent most of our free time together. I don't understand how he could have been making all these trips without me knowing." The investigation into Hill Country Consulting led to another shell company, then another, creating a paper trail that wound through multiple states and seemed designed to obscure the true source of the payments. Financial investigators eventually traced the money back to a legitimate business, Apex Agricultural Solutions, a large corporation that provided consulting services to factory farms and agricultural operations across the Southwest. Apex Agricultural Solutions, it turned out, had been hiring veterinarians to conduct quiet inspections of factory farms, looking for animal welfare violations that could create legal liability. The work paid well but required absolute confidentiality. If word got out that a farm was being investigated, it could destroy business relationships and trigger lawsuits. "Dr. Caldwell was one of our most reliable consultants," admitted Apex CEO Robert Harrison when contacted by investigators. "He had an excellent eye for animal welfare issues and was completely trustworthy. We're as shocked as anyone by his disappearance." But this revelation raised new questions. Had Jimmy discovered something during one of his consulting jobs that put him in danger? Were the mysterious phone call and his subsequent disappearance connected to his work for Apex? Investigators began reviewing the factory farms Jimmy had inspected over the past year. Most were large operations with minimal violations, the kind of routine inspections that generated paperwork but little controversy. But one farm stood out, Lone Star Livestock, a massive cattle operation in East Texas that Jimmy had visited just 2 weeks before his disappearance. Jimmy's report on Lone Star Livestock was damning. He'd found evidence of systematic animal abuse, unsafe conditions, and violations of federal animal welfare regulations. The kind of report that could shut down a multi-million-dollar operation and result in criminal charges against the owners. "That report was a bombshell," explained agricultural law attorney Maria Santos, no relation to Jimmy's receptionist. "If it had been filed with federal regulators, Lone Star Livestock would have faced massive fines and possible criminal prosecution. That's the kind of thing that gives people powerful motives." The investigation into Lone Star Livestock revealed an operation much different from the small family farms that surrounded Cedar Ridge. Owned by a consortium of investors based in Dallas, the facility processed thousands of cattle monthly, with an annual revenue estimated in the tens of millions of dollars. Jimmy's inspection report, completed just 2 weeks before his disappearance, read like a catalog of horrors. Cattle kept in overcrowded conditions without adequate water. Sick animals not receiving proper veterinary care. Workers using electric prods excessively, causing unnecessary stress and injury. The kind of systematic problems that suggested management prioritized profit over animal welfare. But there was something else in Jimmy's report that caught investigators' attention, a handwritten note in the margin that read, "Ask RH about the South Pasture situation." RH appeared to refer to Robert Harrison, the CEO of Apex Agricultural Solutions, who had hired Jimmy as a consultant. When questioned about the note, Harrison became visibly uncomfortable. Jimmy mentioned seeing something in the South Pasture that concerned him, Harrison admitted. But he didn't want to put it in his official report until he could investigate further. "What kind of something?" pressed investigator Martinez. Harrison hesitated before answering. Jimmy thought he saw evidence that cattle had been buried on the property without proper reporting to state authorities. If true, it could indicate that Lone Star was disposing of diseased animals illegally. This revelation opened an entirely new avenue of investigation. Illegal disposal of livestock carcasses wasn't just an animal welfare issue, it was a public health hazard that could contaminate groundwater and spread disease. It was the kind of violation that could result in federal criminal charges and massive civil penalties. More importantly, it was the kind of secret that people might kill to protect. DPS investigators requested a search warrant for Lone Star Livestock, but the company's lawyers immediately filed motions to block the search. The legal battle stretched on for days while Jimmy remained missing, prompting Sheriff Thompson to pursue other leads. The mysterious phone call that Jimmy had received on the morning of his disappearance remained unexplained, but investigators had made some progress. Cell tower data showed that the prepaid phone had been used in the Austin area in the days before Jimmy's disappearance, specifically near the offices of several companies that did business with Lone Star Livestock. Someone connected to Lone Star wanted to talk to Jimmy without being traced, concluded investigator Martinez. The question is whether they wanted to threaten him, bribe him, or eliminate him entirely. Meanwhile, the search for Jimmy continued across East Texas. Volunteers had covered hundreds of square miles, checked dozens of abandoned buildings, and followed up on countless tips from well-meaning citizens. But as the weeks passed, hope was beginning to fade. The longer someone stays missing, the less likely they are to be found alive, Sheriff Thompson explained to the assembled media at a press conference 3 weeks after Jimmy's disappearance. But we're not giving up. Jimmy Caldwell was a pillar of this community, and we owe it to him and his family to find out what happened. The press conference generated renewed media attention, which brought both help and complications. Tips poured in from across the state, but most led nowhere. Amateur investigators flooded social media with theories ranging from the plausible to the bizarre. Conspiracy theorists suggested everything from government cover-ups to alien abduction. But one tip stood out from the rest. A truck driver who regularly hauled cattle to processing plants across Texas called to report that he'd seen Jimmy's white pickup truck on the morning of August 15, not on Farm Road 1847 where it was found, but on Interstate 35 near Austin, more than 100 miles away. "I'm sure it was the same truck," the driver insisted. "White Ford F-250 with vet equipment in the back. I remember because I was thinking about getting my dog vaccinated and wondering if the vet made house calls." If true, this sighting suggested that Jimmy had driven much farther than anyone realized on the day he disappeared, and that his truck had somehow been returned to Farm Road 1847 after he vanished. It was a development that changed everything investigators thought they knew about the case. The truck driver's sighting prompted investigators to expand their search for surveillance cameras along Interstate 35. Modern highways are monitored by dozens of cameras, traffic management systems, toll road cameras, and security systems at gas stations and truck stops. If Jimmy's truck had traveled to Austin on August 15, there should be electronic evidence. After days of reviewing footage, investigators found what they were looking for. Jimmy's truck appeared on 3 different traffic cameras along I-35, heading south toward Austin at approximately 2:30 p.m. on the day he disappeared, exactly when he should have been arriving at Riverside Ranch for his scheduled farm call. But the truck's driver was invisible in the grainy footage, obscured by sun glare and the angle of the cameras. Investigators couldn't determine if Jimmy was driving his own truck or if someone else had taken it. More troubling was what happened next in the surveillance footage. Jimmy's truck exited the interstate near Austin and disappeared into the city's maze of surface streets. It didn't reappear on highway cameras until nearly 6 p.m., when it was spotted heading north back toward Cedar Ridge. "That's a 4-hour window when we don't know where the truck was or what was happening," noted investigator Martinez. 4 hours is enough time for a meeting, a confrontation, or worse. The timeline was becoming clearer, but it raised more questions than it answered. If Jimmy had driven to Austin that afternoon, why hadn't he called his receptionist to cancel the Riverside Ranch appointment? Why hadn't he answered his phone when Tom Hartley called? And most importantly, if Jimmy had driven to Austin voluntarily, why was his truck found abandoned on a country road with no sign of him? The investigation took another dramatic turn when federal agents arrived in Cedar Ridge. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives had been conducting their own investigation into Lone Star Livestock, based on tips that the operation might be involved in illegal activities beyond animal welfare violations. ATF agent Sarah Kim briefed local investigators on what federal agents had discovered. Lone Star Livestock was suspected of serving as a front for money laundering operations, using cattle sales to clean money from drug trafficking and other criminal enterprises. The operation was much larger and more sophisticated than anyone had realized. Dr. Caldwell may have stumbled into something much bigger than animal welfare violations, Agent Kim explained. If he discovered evidence of the money laundering operation, that would give certain people powerful motives to silence him. The federal investigation had been building cases against several individuals connected to Lone Star Livestock, but Jimmy's disappearance had accelerated their timeline. They couldn't risk losing their only potential witness to whatever had happened at the facility. Federal agents obtained the search warrant that local investigators had been unable to secure. The search of Lone Star Livestock was scheduled for dawn on September 15, exactly 1 month after Jimmy's disappearance. The night before the search, Cedar Ridge felt different. Word had leaked that something big was happening, and the town buzzed with nervous energy. People gathered in small groups at the cafe and hardware store, speculating about what investigators might find and whether it would finally reveal what had happened to their beloved veterinarian. Sarah Chun couldn't sleep that night. She sat in her apartment above the pharmacy, staring out at the dark streets of the town where she and Jimmy had planned to build a life together. "I kept thinking that tomorrow we'd finally have answers," she later recalled. "I didn't know if I wanted them or not." Sheriff Thompson spent the night reviewing case files, preparing for whatever the federal search might reveal. In his 20 years of law enforcement, he'd never handled a case that had generated so much attention or carried such high stakes. "I kept thinking about Jimmy," Sheriff Thompson later reflected. Here was a good man who dedicated his life to helping animals and serving his community. If we couldn't find justice for someone like Jimmy Caldwell, what did that say about all of us? As dawn approached on September 15, a convoy of federal agents, local investigators, and search specialists prepared to enter Lone Star Livestock. Whatever secrets the facility held were about to be revealed. The federal search of Lone Star Livestock began at sunrise on September 15, 2024. More than 30 agents from various agencies descended on the facility, armed with search warrants that covered every building, vehicle, and acre of the property. What they found exceeded even their worst expectations. The main cattle processing area revealed the animal welfare violations that Jimmy had documented, but they were minor compared to what agents discovered in the facility's administrative offices. Computers contained detailed records of a money laundering operation that had processed millions of dollars through fake cattle sales over the past 3 years. But the most significant discovery came in the south pasture that Jimmy had noted in his report. Ground-penetrating radar revealed multiple burial sites where cattle carcasses had been illegally disposed of, but the sites also contained something else. Mixed in with the animal remains were traces of human DNA. It wasn't Jimmy, Agent Kim was quick to clarify when the news reached Cedar Ridge. The DNA evidence suggests multiple individuals over several years. This facility was being used as a disposal site for more than just cattle. The implications were staggering. Lone Star Livestock hadn't just been laundering money, it had been serving as a disposal site for victims of various criminal enterprises. The remote location and existing infrastructure for processing large animals had made it an ideal location for making inconvenient problems disappear. As federal agents arrested several individuals connected to the operation, including the facility's manager and 2 investors from Dallas, the focus turned back to Jimmy's fate. If he had discovered evidence of the murder and disposal operation, his life had been in immediate danger from the moment he completed his inspection. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of the arrested managers, facing federal charges that could result in life imprisonment, decided to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. Marcus Webb, the facility's operations manager, provided details that finally explained Jimmy's disappearance. Jimmy had indeed discovered evidence of the disposal site during his August inspection, and he had attempted to gather more information before filing his report. But facility security had noticed his interest in the south pasture and reported it to the criminal organization behind the operation. They decided Dr. Caldwell was too dangerous to let live, Webb told investigators. The plan was to make him disappear quietly, without connecting it to the facility. On the morning of August 15, Webb had called Jimmy using the prepaid phone, claiming to be a whistleblower who wanted to provide additional evidence about animal welfare violations at Lone Star. He'd arranged to meet Jimmy at a location near Austin, knowing that Jimmy would come alone to protect his source. Jimmy had driven to the meeting spot, where he was confronted by two men connected to the criminal organization. When Jimmy realized he was in danger, he'd attempted to escape but was overpowered. His truck was driven back to Farm Road 1847 and abandoned there to make his disappearance look like a random event unconnected to his work. What happened to Dr. Caldwell after that? Agent Kim pressed Webb during his confession. Webb's answer brought an end to weeks of hoping and uncertainty. They killed him that same day and disposed of his body at the facility. He's buried in the South Pasture with the others. The search of the South Pasture intensified, using advanced forensic techniques to locate and recover human remains from the illegal burial site. On September 22, 2024, investigators confirmed that they had found Jimmy Caldwell's body. The news hit Cedar Ridge like a physical blow. The community that had hoped against hope for Jimmy's safe return now had to face the reality that their beloved veterinarian had died because he tried to protect animals and expose the truth. As I conclude tonight's story, the sounds of the Texas evening are quieting around us, just as the town of Cedar Ridge had to find a way to heal after learning the truth about Jimmy Caldwell's fate. The investigation that began with a simple missing person report had uncovered a criminal enterprise that stretched across multiple states and involved dozens of victims. Marcus Webb and 4 other individuals were ultimately convicted on federal charges ranging from money laundering to multiple counts of murder. The dismantling of their operation led to arrests in 3 states and provided closure for families who'd been searching for missing loved ones for years. Lone Star Livestock was permanently shut down, its assets seized by federal authorities. The facility that had been used for such horrific purposes was eventually demolished, and the land was turned over to the state to become a wildlife preserve, a fitting memorial for a man who dedicated his life to protecting animals. Jimmy Caldwell was laid to rest in the Cedar Ridge Cemetery on a hill overlooking the town he'd served so faithfully. His funeral drew more than 1,000 mourners from across Texas, including farmers whose animals he'd treated, colleagues from veterinary school, and complete strangers who'd been touched by his story. Sarah Chen established the James Caldwell Memorial Fund, which provides scholarships for veterinary students who commit to practicing in rural communities. The fund has already helped dozens of young veterinarians follow in Jimmy's footsteps, carrying on his mission of caring for animals in places where good vets are desperately needed. The White House on Elm Street that housed Jimmy's clinic has been converted into a memorial veterinary clinic, operated by volunteer vets who donate their time to continue serving the animals of Cedar Ridge and surrounding counties. As you drift off to sleep tonight, remember Jimmy Caldwell, a man whose commitment to doing what was right ultimately cost him his life, but whose legacy continues to protect and heal animals across rural Texas. Remember that even in our modern world, there are still people willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. Sometimes the most ordinary people, a small-town veterinarian who loved his work and his community, become heroes simply by refusing to look the other way when they encounter evil. Thank you for listening to tonight's true crime story. Rest peacefully, knowing that another story awaits you next time, ready to accompany you on another journey toward restorative sleep. But if you're still awake, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.